up, what's up, what's up? How you guys doing today? You doing good? Anyway, hello, good morning. We are going to be watching this hearing entitled Threats to the Homeland, which begins about 15 minutes, actually. Let's be precise, 11 minutes from now. Now, this is going to be interesting because we've got Christopher Wray. We've got Homeland Security Director Alejandro Mayorkas. And then we got some other lady who I don't know what the fuck she does. I've never even heard of her before. She's some lady that does stuff about stuff. But yeah, man, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting hearing. Let me make sure my goofy voice isn't on. Nope. Yeah, okay, there we go. So it's not on this morning. We're just chilling. Just chilling. I'm wearing sweatpants today. You know why? Because I can. Because I can. And it was chilly. And I didn't want to wear jeans because the belt hurts me. You know, after sitting all day long, the belt kind of digs into my sides a little bit. So whatever. I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm wearing sweats. I got to say, man, I looked at myself in the mirror this morning and I was like, doctor, I look good in sweat. How many of you guys know that I am now a doctor? Yeah, Mike, see, I beat you. I'm now officially a doctor. Cost me $19. I'm a doctor. I have my doctorate in divinity. And it's true. I really do. It's funny. I bought it yesterday. $19 from the Universal Life Church. And the reason why I did it, it's because I was doing a little bit of research on Daryl Brooks's grandmother, right? Because she came out, she's like, I'm Dr. Mary Edwards. And I'm like, bullshit. And so I decided to look her up because some just told me that she was lying through her teeth, right? And so I looked her up, and she does have books. She's a published author. She does have books on Amazon. She's got one review. I've got 28 on my book that I wrote called Inside the Mind of Joseph Biden, available on Amazon right now. Every page is as empty as Joe Biden's promises. See? And because his brain doesn't work, so it's empty. Get it? Inside the mind. It's funny. And yeah, I've sold like hundreds of those books, to be honest. I do have one-star review where apparently someone bought it thinking that there was going to be some like really good stuff in there about Joe Biden, and then to find out it was blank, they were mad. But yeah, so I sold more books in her, and so I was like, hey, I want to figure out her doctorate, right? So I traced it down. She made it a little bit hard to see. She does go by the doctor or whatever. So, but I wanted to find out where she got it from. I eventually found it. She got it from this college in Florida, right? And I was like, oh wait, I remember why. Florida doesn't do any licensing for colleges that are faith-based. Right. So I look up the college. I look up the ownership of the college. I look up that lady. She's got like 15 businesses. Each one is like donation, type business and college. Blah. So yeah, it's a paper mill. So she got her doctorate in divinity. And I was like, I wonder if that's like true. And so I went over to the Universal. I wrote doctor in divinity on social media. And of course it came up and it's like, you could purchase yours now. And I was like, what? Say less. Say less, kid. Say less. So I went over and I was on like universallifechurch.notreal.com. And then it's like, you must become a minister first. You must be you must become ordained before you get your doctorate of divinity. And I'm like, shit. So I can get my doctorate plus I can become a minister? Hell yeah. $65 later, guess what? I'm an ordained minister and I have a doctorate in divinity. So I fucking win. You know what I mean? So now everyone, I demand when I am in the Angry Turnip thing, I'm going to change it now. It's Dr. Angry Turnip for all of you guys. And I'm going to try to go with the state of Virginia and see if I can have a doctor added before my name on my ID. No, I'm not doing that. But wouldn't that be funny? Right? If I just said, fuck it, I changed my LinkedIn profile so it says doctor. This is so crazy. So crazy, but it was fun, and it is fun, and I think it's hilarious, and maybe you don't, right? But I think it's funny, and I'm the first one in my family to become a doctor. Like, I mean, come on. Come on. And I did order, I spent an extra $8 because I'm so frivolous on the certificate that says Doctor of Divinity with my name printed all fancy in calligraphy. Yeah, I'm going to frame that, put it right up on the wall. Because it's funny. I'll put it right next to all my powerlifting competitions because, well, I had 7 of them. Now I only have 3 records because people have stealth gone. But isn't that funny, man? Isn't that funny? PhD of CBD edibles. I know. I was looking. I also could buy a doctorate in metaphysics. Yeah. But that one, they actually make you do some coursework, which I thought was funny. But actually, I should put it somewhere else, not next to the powerlifting things, because then people will be like, oh, wait, he doesn't really, he's not really a competitive powerlifter. Hell yeah, I am. And I can outlift you, like almost guaranteed. I could outlift you. Hey, how many of you guys print shirts at home? I know we have a lot of people. I've got about 300 t-shirts in the back that are blank, right? All nice ones. Typically, like most of them are Gildan soft style, small and mediums. Whole thing, $900 plus shipping. Comes with like 2 dozen sweatshirts too. $900 plus shipping. Let's go. Because I got to get it out of here. I'm going to build a whole gym in the back because the only thing I do here now is coffee and package all the boxes and all that stuff. So I don't need to have all these shirts. So if you print shirts, let me know. I mean, that's a hell of a deal. You're getting like $1,700 worth of shirts for $900. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do some quick news updates. Yesterday, there was a active shooter scenario that was I talked about it on the show very briefly. It was kind of by my house, in between here and my house, from my office to the house. So roughly 10 minutes from here. I did, on the way home, drive by the command center just because I was curious. I didn't bring my camera. I forgot. And I was like, I should have brought the camera because I could have just taken some video because there wasn't any. But I was live tweeting it all night long, and it was crazy, dude. They tear gassed the shit out of this fella, and so much so that he ended up passing out. Now, they caught him. He's like a 45-year-old fucking dude. He was shooting at police for a long time. He ended up, allegedly, he called 911 saying he killed his wife. Neighbors reportedly saw his girlfriend climb through a window along with her 2 children. They were rescued by police and an armored Bearcat. And then this man, for about 4 or 5 hours, was shooting around inside the house, and he was shooting at police officers outside. They ended up using several tear gas canisters, volleys of it, to try to get him to go. They used robots. He shot the robots. They used drones. He shot the drones. It's very crazy considering it's such a small town. But they eventually, with a different drone, they were able to see that he was moaning by a window. They shot 7 canisters of tri gas. So it's like a non-flammable, like extremely toxic gas into the room where he was in. So apparently he literally, I don't know what happened. He passed out. He lost consciousness from it. It doesn't specify in the news reporting whether he had any self-inflicted gun wounds or was injured or anything like that. He was threatening to kill cops. He was threatening to kill himself throughout the entire standoff. Long story short, we heard around 10:30 last night, police, the SWAT teams, because they had SWAT teams from all over the area, from all over the counties. Like Warren County SWAT was there, and that's a different county. Like they were all over the place. But I heard on the scanner, they hit him with a beanbag, and he didn't even budge, so they figured he was out. And then the police went in and got him, brought him out the back, loaded him into an ambulance, and transported him to the hospital. So he apparently is alive. He has been identified as some 45-year-old guy, they say, or 40-something-year-old guy. What does it say? 45-year-old Darren Eugene Sullivan. They say he was drunk and upset over a domestic matter. Yeah, and that's it. They got him. And yeah, the house is ruined likely because he was shooting. Apparently, like the one thing we heard on the scanner is, I guess they were talking to him on the phone, or someone was, and right as they were getting ready to do the first volley of tear gas into the house, he said, if any of the cops come in here, I got 650 rounds and I'm going to, blah, blah, blah. I'll shoot them all, or something like that. And then they broadcast that on the scanner, and that was crazy. But it was crazy, man. Yeah, it was fun to watch. There's also this thing that's going on. We only got a few more minutes till this hearing begins, but there's also this 22-year-old guy that was not drunk that ran over all those police officers yesterday, or police cadets, the sheriff cadets in Los Angeles, California. Now, for some reason, they haven't released his name. They haven't released, any photos of him or anything like that. Even after this, he's apparently in custody. And it turns out that he may be from a law enforcement family. They did say that he did take a breathalyzer and he passed that. So he wasn't under the influence of alcohol, at least. Um, but the reason, apparently, like even the sheriff, I guess April said on Twitter that the sheriff even said this was a horrible accident. They better release this guy's information. I don't give a shit how connected he is to law enforcement at all. The fact that they haven't released his information is it shows that we have a problem with our justice system. Because I'll be honest, if the guy didn't have any connections to the police department or it didn't come from a law enforcement family, his photo would be all over social media. His photo would be all over the news. But the fact is, they're being so mum about it. Even if it was a tragic accident, even if the guy was using his cell, there's literally, I saw the video. There's no way that, I said, I put it on social media. There's no way this was an accident, because here's the thing. The car never stopped. It never braked. It didn't do anything. So if the guy's using his cell phone while driving a motor vehicle, it's still not an accident, because he's doing something reckless, which caused the massive traumatic injuries to so many potential future police officers. So that kind of ticks me off. You know what I mean? Because I think they should be showing it. I think they should be showing who it is, because I think that's important. But yeah, that's it. People are talking about Biden. I don't care. He's a moron. What else? There's a lot of conversation back and forth about everything. A lot of this stuff, like, everyone remember this Marriage Equality Act that's going on in Congress, and some people are like, oh, there were only 12 Republicans voted for it. Those 12 Republicans have no spine, and they don't believe in religion. And I should know. I have a doctorate in divinity. The reason why Republicans were objecting to this Marriage Equality Act is not because they're against gay marriage or biracial marriage. Nope. It's because the law specifically opens it up that if you are a religious person and you choose not to say like, in my official capacity as an ordained minister now, say I get called to chair a wedding for two gay people, right? Or to officiate. You could tell I'm not professional. To officiate a wedding between two gay people. And if I make the determination that I don't want to do so, guess what? Under this new law, they could sue me. They could sue me under the premise that I am, being, what is it, homophobic or something like that? I don't know, and that's why everybody's talking about it. That's why that's why the GOP or the majority of the Republican Senate did not vote in favor of this, is because they tried. Senator Lee, I believe, Mike Lee, tried to do a carve out to say, hey, listen, as long as people that don't believe in this and are using their religious freedom, the freedom that we allegedly have, that as long as they're not being infringed upon by the IRS, for say they're a nonprofit, right? Say I wanted to open a ministry of and call it the Church of Turnips. I could legally do that in this state now because I am an ordained minister. How freaking
the committee will come to order. First off, I'd like to thank our witnesses for
the hearing's on, so
continued service.
I will be doing
American
a TV
people.
giveaway.
This hearing
some
is
point today.
an important opportunity.
So you may
want
to send cash apps and all that now. You'll be included.
Nation's top national security and law enforcement officials about the threats facing our nations, and how Congress can ensure the federal government is prepared to protect our communities from them. More than 20 years ago, the September 11th terrorist attacks changed our nation forever. In response, Congress created the Department of Homeland Security, and our entire national security apparatus focused on keeping Americans safe from international terrorism. However, in more than 2 decades following those attacks, the threats to our communities have evolved and have become increasingly complex. While we must continue to monitor international terror threats, there's no question that we must be better prepared to defend against our top national security officials, including those before us here today, have called the most lethal terrorist threat to Americans: domestic terrorism fueled by white nationalist and anti-government ideologies. Yesterday, I released a report detailing the results of my investigation. And alarmingly, my investigation found that DHS and the FBI are not adequately addressing the evolving domestic terrorism threat. Despite a requirement in law written by myself and Senator Johnson, DHS and FBI have failed to effectively measure and share comprehensive data on the threat posed by violent domestic extremists and specifically white supremacist and anti-government violence. Without this comprehensive data, it's impossible for Congress and for this committee to determine whether our nation's counterterrorism resources are effectively aligned to tackle the domestic terrorism threat. We need a data-driven approach to prevent deadly incidents like the January 6th Capitol breach, the tragic shooting in Buffalo, and countless other domestic terrorist attacks that have been fueled by hateful extremist ideologies. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what resources and tools their agencies need to effectively collect data on domestic terrorism and to prevent these crimes. Today, we'll also have the opportunity to discuss the significant threat that cyber attacks pose to our national and our economic security. I'm proud of bipartisan work. Senator Portman and I have led this Congress to enact some of the most significant reforms in our nation's cybersecurity policy in history. Our reforms will ensure that DHS has the tools, the resources, and the authorities needed to protect critical infrastructure, state and local governments, and other targets from cyber attacks. However, there's more that must be done to continue securing our vulnerabilities from criminal hackers and foreign adversaries, and I look forward to discussing these topics today. One of the most serious threats and one of the toughest to tackle is the threat posed by increasingly severe natural disasters and climate change. This is an existential threat to our planet, and unless it is addressed, it will have a significant impact on our homeland security. Today, we'll hear more about how our national security agencies are tracking these challenges and how they're planning to address the security threats they present now and into the future. We also have a challenging situation at our southern border, and today we'll discuss the administration's work to secure both our northern and southern borders and prevent illegal trafficking and stop the flow of deadly, illicit drugs like fentanyl into our communities. Those are difficult missions that must be accomplished, ensuring that lawful international trade and travel can continue to flow smoothly at our ports of entry and keep states like my home state of Michigan a hub for international commerce. As our national security agents continue to tackle these long-standing threats, they must also be prepared to counter emerging ones. Over the last few years, the threat posed by unmanned aerial systems or drones has become increasingly perilous. Small drones, which can be purchased off the shelf at any electronics store, can be weaponized by malicious actors to damage our nation's critical infrastructure or inflict mass casualties. Today's drones can be used to launch remote attacks on everything from government buildings to crowds at public events, including large sports stadiums. We cannot let the current authorities that help address this grave threat expire in December, and I'll continue working to ensure those important authorities are extended and that they are updated. Similarly, weaponized biological, chemical, nuclear, and radioactive materials also remain a significant threat to our homeland security. I have introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Portman to reauthorize and strengthen the Office of DHS charged with overseeing these threats, and will continue working with my colleagues to pass it as soon as possible. The scope and the volume of these and many other national security threats requires Congress and this administration to work together to ensure that we're doing everything we can to keep Americans safe. Today, I'm pleased to welcome back each of our witnesses to hear more about how their agencies are working to effectively carry out this daunting and essential mission. And I look forward to a productive discussion. But before I turn things over, I want to just take a moment to recognize my colleague, Senator Portman, who is retiring this year. Rob, I'll tell you, it has been an absolute pleasure to work with you over the past 2 years in this committee. I'm grateful for all of your hard work and your diligence to help us pass such meaningful bipartisan legislation through this committee, from providing important financial relief to the U.S. Postal Service to strengthen our ability to detect and deter cyber attacks, and working to make our nation more secure and more effective for taxpayers. It's certainly been a real pleasure, and I wish you Godspeed in all your future endeavors, but all the work you did here will certainly never be forgotten.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield to me for just a minute? 5 seconds. 5 seconds. I just want to say, I'm Tom Carper, and I approve that message.
And I would also like to thank Staff Director Tom Thiessen, or Pam. Hi, Pam. Did I say Tom? You're Pam. I know that. I know you so well. Pam, you just have an exceptional team. There may be a Tom somewhere on your team too. I don't know, but Pam, you've been exceptional. You have put together an incredible team. We've worked together, accomplished a lot together. Always have been open. Many times, maybe not agreeing fully, but always finding a way to try to find common ground. We wish you Godspeed as well in your future as well, Pam. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. With that, Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to respond to those comments, we appreciate the relationship we've had and the work we've gotten done. This committee has done a lot on a bipartisan basis, and some of it doesn't get any notice because it is non-controversial by the time we finish our process.
In the background, then
in the process, I want to thank you and all the members of the committee for working with us to pass dozens of bills that are making an important difference to our constituents. And to you and to David Weinberg of your staff, not Tom, but David, we want to thank you for your willingness to work with us. Again, we haven't agreed on everything, but we've been able to find common ground where possible and move the country forward. So thank you very much for that. Today is my last hearing as ranking member, and it's appropriate that it be this hearing because it is so important to the oversight responsibilities of this committee and, more importantly, important to our country right now. We have, unfortunately, a proliferation of threats facing the homeland, and I appreciate the fact that the right people are here today before us to be able to address.
Yeah, real quick, guys, I got to run out. I bought a new Olympic bar, so I got to go get it. It's available for pickup. I'll be listening and watching. Be appropriate in the chat. And please share this out because I think this is a hearing that if we can get as many people to watch this as that watch the Darrell Brooks trial, maybe people will understand. This is the first step to changing what's happening in Washington is paying attention to what they're doing in Washington. That's why people blindly vote because they think that these people represent them. Watch this. You'll see that they don't.
And are doing their best to further that mission. Every fall since the terrorist attacks on 9/11, we've had this hearing. We were a little late this year because of scheduling issues, but I think it's really important that we hold it because it is a time to stand back a little bit and reflect on where we are and how we can work together to address these potential threats and active threats. I can think of no greater priority for this committee. I'm going to start with the crisis at the southern border because sadly, I'm leaving at a time when we really haven't made the progress we should have made on a bipartisan basis. But again, we have to raise these issues and attempt to solve some of these very significant problems. The failed border policies from this administration has ensured that not only do our nation's borders remain unsecure, but foreign adversaries, transnational criminal organizations, and other nefarious actors can too easily enter our country now and therefore threaten the safety and the security of our public. So this issue has not gotten better, it's gotten worse. And in the past year, the Border Patrol apprehended more than 2 million total unlawful migrants. That's up 143% since 2019. This chart behind me shows in color kind of the blue, green, and red of where we have been. FY21 and FY22 figures are on the right. We just got the final figures for fiscal year 2022. And unfortunately, it tells a very dramatic story of us failing to secure that southern border. This does not include the number of gotaways or individuals who are not detected. What we hear from the Border Patrol is that the number of gotaways has increased significantly as well. These are criminals, often, who engage in human trafficking, criminals who involve themselves in the drug trade. And so this is about people, but it's also about the fact that we have a record number of fentanyl shipments coming through the border, both the ports of entry and between the ports of entry now. We know this from anecdotal evidence, but also because there's a record number of seizures of these deadly fentanyl shipments into our communities. And fentanyl, of course, is what's causing the most number of overdose deaths at a time when we have a record number, sadly, of overdose deaths in our country. In Ohio, we think it's between 2/3 and 3/4 of the deaths are related to this one drug, deadly fentanyl, which is primarily coming across the Mexican border now. So this has been a tough couple years. The worst 2 years of unlawful migration and the worst 2 years of drug seizures in our nation's history. So I look forward to talking about that. We've got to figure out how to move forward again on a bipartisan basis. We've got to figure out how to fix what is clearly a broken system. Another issue I want to address today is the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and what that means in terms of the United States. Afghans who stood with us and our allies were left behind to suffer under Taliban rule. And meanwhile, more than 36,000 Afghans with no record of ever having partnered with us, some of whom may have ties to terrorist groups, were paroled into our country without proper screening and vetting. And I appreciate the fact that, Director Wray, you're here to talk about that in addition to Secretary Mayorkas, because this is one, again, where I think we made mistakes, and we can correct those mistakes. We can go back, and I know you're starting to do that from testimony we've had both publicly and privately. We had this unfortunate, chaotic, and precipitous withdrawal that caused a lot of issues, but one was paroling people into our country who weren't properly screened. There have been 3 reports now from 2 inspectors general documenting the failures of DHS vetting and then paroling known or suspected terrorists into our communities. And yet, we just don't have an acknowledgement of that problem from DHS. So President Biden requested and received an additional $15 million for the FBI to conduct counterterror investigations of known or suspected terrorists among the Afghan evacuees released into our country by DHS. In other words, he asked for $15 million to give to the FBI to do this additional vetting, and yet the administration says it's not a problem. Those two are inconsistent, of course. So perhaps we can talk about those divergent views on this panel this morning. We all recognize the grave threat posed by our adversaries, such as Russia, Iran, and China, who rely on disinformation tactics to weaken our democracy. I think there's a consensus about that. But at home, we've got to be much more careful around issues of domestic speech. We must respond to imminent threats of violence, of course. I don't think anybody in this committee disagrees with that. But censoring constitutionally protected speech is an entirely different matter. To be precise, that should be a red line. And I hope we can all agree that the United States government should not censor the speech of our own citizens. America's speech, differences of opinion, and political viewpoints are not a threat to democracy, but actually a bedrock of it. We know now that DHS disbanded its disturbing disinformation governance board after significant public outcry, but we also know that it has continued its efforts to curb speech under the guise of countering misinformation or disinformation. The entanglement of the FBI and DHS with social media platforms for the purpose of controlling narratives is something we need to talk about today. I think it's a deep concern that all Americans have, that we not cross that red line. Recent reports allege that DHS is colluding with big tech to moderate content in a way that conforms with the Biden administration's political views, including on the Afghanistan withdrawal and things like the origin of COVID. Our democracy is also under threat because Congress and the administration have been unwilling to confront the systemic threat of U.S. intellectual property by China that is undermining our national security and our economic security. Secretary Wray has been outspoken on this. His quote is, "There is no country that poses a broader and more severe threat to our innovation, our ideas, and our economic security than China," end quote. I couldn't agree more. But every day, China reinforces the findings of our various investigations of this committee, showing the staggering extent of the Chinese government's efforts to conduct influence and espionage operations in our country and to steal American technology, research, and information for their own military and economic benefit. So addressing what the Communist Party of China is doing is more urgent than ever. And yet the Safeguarding American Innovation Act, which was reported out of this committee, has been blocked from becoming law because of the unwillingness of Congress to confront this issue. Cyber attacks are another significant issue facing every sector of our country. We talked about this a moment ago with Senator Peters. We have made some progress here in this committee. I appreciate that. But cyber attacks are growing, and they are a force multiplier for our adversaries. So we have to understand that this is an issue that they're going to continue to use. Our economic and security is depending on technology, and we've got to be sure that we're not vulnerable here. Compounding that problem is the inherent difficulty of attributing cyber attacks to specific nation states or criminal groups. Terrorism and targeted violence also remain a serious threat to our country. This year, an Islamic terrorist gained entry into the United States and attacked a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. In a separate incident, an Ohio-based Islamic State operative plotted to assassinate former President Bush. So we're not out of the woods in terms of the Islamic terrorist threat. I remain convinced that we can deal with these issues on a bipartisan basis, as we have in the past. But I am concerned about the threat posed by foreign terrorist organizations, especially in the wake of our withdrawal from Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda continues to pose a threat. The Islamic State continues to expand and mobilize. Iranian-sponsored Shia terrorist groups target key U.S. interests and government officials consistently. We must remain vigilant as these groups organize and organizations regroup and evolve. We must restore confidence in the American public that we're committed to protect our nation from terrorism, espionage, and other homeland security threats. And this should be a bipartisan effort. We all have the same goal, a safe, secure American homeland. So with that said, I look forward to the testimony this morning, Mr. Chairman, most importantly, the responses to questions regarding the record of the administration addressing these threats, what we can do going forward together. I will note that only last week did we receive overdue answers to questions that we had from last year's hearing. It took over a year. I would hope that in this case we'll get more prompt responses to committee questions that are posed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Before I swear in the witnesses, I just want to make sure everyone knows how this will proceed, both our witnesses and members. We're going to have 2 rounds of questions today. The first round, as we normally do, will be 7 minutes for each person. And then the second round, we're going to have 5 minutes per person on the second round due to time constraints with all of our witnesses. And I'm going to enforce those time limits perhaps a little more aggressively than I have in the past for everyone. 7 minutes first round, 5 minutes the second round. It's the practice of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if each of you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is the 7th Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Over his distinguished 30-year career as a law enforcement official and nationally recognized lawyer, he has served as the department's Deputy Secretary, as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and at the Department of Justice as Assistant United States Attorney in the Central District of California. Mr. Secretary, thank you again for being here before the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for inviting me to join you today. Ranking Member Portman, thank you for your unwavering support of our department. Next week marks the 20th anniversary of the Homeland Security Act being signed into law. This act brought together many components of the federal government to safeguard the United States against foreign terrorism in the wake of the devastation wrought on September 11, 2001. It remains the largest reorganization of the federal government's national security establishment since 1947. It is a testament to the grave threat we faced as a nation from terrorism brought to our shores by foreign actors and foreign terrorist organizations. Congress created a department that has significantly reduced the risk foreign terrorism poses to the homeland by increasing our capacity to prepare for and respond to those events. Foreign terrorist organizations remain committed to attacking the United States from within and beyond our borders. They use social media platforms to amplify messaging intended to inspire attacks in the homeland. They have adapted to changing security environments, seeking new and innovative ways to target the United States. The evolving terrorism threat to the homeland now includes lone actors or small cells, domestic violent extremists seeking to further some political or social goal or act on a grievance, and homegrown violent extremists looking to advance the interest of a foreign terrorist organization. From cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure to increasing destabilizing efforts by hostile nation states, the threats facing the homeland have never been greater or more complex. Flouting internationally accepted norms of responsible behavior in cyberspace, our adversaries, hostile nations and non-nation state cyber criminals continue to advance in capability and sophistication. Their methods vary, but their goals of doing harm are the same. Hostile nations like Russia, the People's Republic of China, Iran, and North Korea, and cyber criminals around the world continue to sharpen their tactics and create more adverse consequences. Their ransomware attacks target our financial institutions, hospitals, pipelines, electric grids, and water treatment plants, attempting to wreak havoc on our daily lives. They exploit the integrated global cyber ecosystem to sow discord, undermine democracy, and erode trust in our institutions, public and private. These cyber operations threaten the economic and national security of every American and many others around the world. In particular, China is using its technology to tilt the global playing field to its benefit. They leverage sophisticated cyber capabilities to gain access to the intellectual property, data, and infrastructure of American individuals and businesses. Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine intensified the risk of a cyber attack impacting our critical infrastructure earlier this year. Nation-state aggression is creating a heightened risk of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear-related threats to Americans as well. While fast-emerging technologies like unmanned aerial systems, artificial intelligence, internet communications, and cryptocurrencies are helping societies be more productive, creative, and entrepreneurial, they also are introducing new risks. Transnational criminal organizations are deploying these technologies to commit a wide array of crimes as they continue to grow in size, scale, sophistication, and lethality. With respect to unmanned aerial systems in particular, it is vital that Congress act before the end of this year to extend our CUAS authorities in order to protect the American people from malicious drone activity. The risk of targeted violence perpetrated by actors abroad and at home is substantial. Emerging technology platforms allow individuals and nation-states to fan the flames of hate and personal grievances to large audiences and are encouraging people to commit violent acts. Those driven to violence are targeting critical infrastructure, soft targets, faith-based institutions, institutions of higher education, racial and religious minorities, government facilities and personnel, including law enforcement and the military, and perceived ideological opponents. Addressing these threats requires a whole-of-society approach across federal, state, and local governments, the private sector, nonprofits, academia, and most importantly, every citizen. Congress may not have predicted the extent of today's threat environment when our department was created 20 years ago, but our mission has never been more vital. Our components have never collaborated more closely, our extraordinary workforce has never been more capable, and our nation has never been more prepared. We must harness the same deliberative and bipartisan spirit in which this department was created to combat the vast threats Americans face today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. Director Christopher Wray is the 8th Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director Wray began his law enforcement career over 2 decades ago, serving in the Department of Justice as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. He has also served on the President's Corporate Fraud Task Force and supervised the Enron Task Force, in addition to playing a key role in the national security objectives for the department. Director Wray, thank you for appearing before this committee. Once again, you may proceed with your opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of the FBI's 38,000 men and women to discuss some of the most pressing threats facing our homeland. When it comes to the current threat landscape, what makes our current situation unique, and I would add particularly serious, is the fact that we're seeing so many different threat areas all elevated at the same time. And I'm proud of the work the FBI's agents, analysts, and professional staff are doing all across the country and around the world every day to rise to that challenge and protect the American people. Protecting the American people from terrorist attack remains the FBI's #1 priority. As I've said before, the greatest threat we face on the terrorism front here in the homeland is from what are effectively lone actors or small cells. And whether you're talking about a domestic violent extremist acting in furtherance of some ideological goal, or a homegrown violent extremist looking to advance the interests of a foreign terrorist organization, these actors often move very quickly from radicalization to action and often use easily obtainable weapons, think a gun, a knife, a car, a crude IED, against soft targets, which is really just intelligence community speak for everyday people going about their everyday lives. Overseas, ISIS and al-Qaeda still aim to inspire, plan, and launch attacks against the United States and our allies, both abroad and here at home. As the Zawahiri strike this summer in Kabul reinforces, the threat of foreign terrorist organizations like al-Qaeda attempting to reconstitute in Afghanistan following our withdrawal is very real, and our ability to gather valuable intelligence on the ground inside Afghanistan has been reduced. That's just a reality, and all of that places a premium on our continued collaboration with our partners, both within the U.S. government and internationally. We have to stay on the balls of our feet and use all of the tools available to us. On top of that, countries like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea are all growing more aggressive, more brazen, more capable. They're coming at us from all angles to undermine our core democratic institutions, our national security, and our rule of law. Of those countries, the greatest long-term threat to our nation's ideas, innovation, and economic security, our national security, is that from China. The Chinese government aspires to equal or surpass the U.S. as a global superpower and influence the world with a value system shaped by undemocratic, authoritarian ideals. But we are confronting that threat head-on. 3 weeks ago, for example, we unsealed charges against 13 individuals, 10 of them Chinese intelligence officers and government officials, for a variety of criminal efforts to exert influence right here in the U.S. on behalf of Beijing. And we have scores of investigations into the China threat in all 56 FBI field offices. On the cyber front, China's vast hacking program is the world's largest by a mile, and they have stolen more of Americans' personal and business data than every other nation combined. But of course, China is not our only challenge in cyberspace, not even close. The FBI's cyber investigations are growing in frequency, scale, and complexity consistent with the evolution of the threat. We're investigating over 100 different ransomware variants, each with scores of victims, as well as a host of other novel threats posed by both cyber criminals and nation states alike. And it's becoming more and more difficult to discern where the cyber criminal activity ends and the nation state activity begins, as the line between those two continues to blur. Just last month, for example, we announced the indictment of 3 Iranian nationals for their roles in a multi-year scheme to compromise the networks of hundreds of organizations, many of which offer critical services Americans rely on every day. To these sorts of actors, nothing is off limits, not even, for example, Boston Children's Hospital, which they set their sights on in the summer of 2021. Now, fortunately, before they could successfully launch their attack, we received a tip from a partner, and working closely with the hospital, we were able to identify and defeat the threat, protecting both the network and the sick kids who depend on it. Our opponents in this space are relentless, and we have to keep responding in kind. And I can assure you that we're going to continue to be aggressive and creative as we run joint sequenced operations with our partners against those adversaries, removing their malware, taking down their botnets, and hunting them down all over the world. Now, that is just a snapshot, really, of some of the many threats we're tackling, and doesn't even include things like our efforts to combat violent crime, where this summer, working with our state and local partners, we arrested on average 50 violent criminals every day. Or our continued focus on human trafficking, where this August, through our annual Operation Cross Country, for instance, the FBI and our partners located more than 200 victims of human trafficking, many of them little kids. Or the work our transnational organized crime section is doing in partnership with agencies like DHS to investigate the movement of people, drugs, guns, and money into the United States across our southern border. The breadth and depth of the threats the FBI's dedicated men and women are tackling each and every day is staggering. And I continue to be inspired by their commitment to our mission of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. And I know we will continue to answer the call. Thank you again for having me here today, and I'd be happy to address your questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Director Wray. Director Christine Abizad is the 8th Senate-confirmed Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Previously, she served on the National Security Council staff as both Director for Counterterrorism and Senior Policy Advisor to the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. She has also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia, and as a Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Abizad, thank you again for appearing before this committee. It's good to have you back. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the overall terrorism landscape. Despite significant progress in diminishing the terrorist threat to the United States, the country continues to face a diversified, transnational, and in many ways unpredictable threat environment at home and abroad. An array of actors, whether foreign terrorist organizations, state sponsors of terrorism, or lone actors, are shaping the nature of today's threat. This changed environment exists amid an ongoing transition for the counterterrorism community, where CT, while still critical, is one of many competing priorities the U.S. national security community must be postured to address. In today's testimony, I'll start by giving an overview of the terrorist threat to the homeland, turn to the overseas threat environment, and then end with some comments on the importance of our continued CT effort. Regarding the United States homeland, terrorist organizations such as ISIS and al-Qaeda remain committed to attacking inside the United States. However, unlike 21 years ago, the threat today is more likely to take the form of an individual attacker inspired by these groups rather than a networked and hierarchically directed plot. In fact, since 9/11, 37 of the 45 ISIS or al-Qaeda-linked attacks in the homeland have been inspired by these groups, rather than centrally directed by them. This trend toward lone actor threats inside the United States extends beyond ISIS and al-Qaeda. It also characterizes the threat we face from domestic actors, such as racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, militia violent extremists, and anarchist violent extremists. In particular, the racially or ethnically motivated violent extremist threat has the most obvious links to transnational actors whose plots and professed ideology encourage mobilization to violence by those vulnerable to their messaging. This threat is fluid, it's fragmented, lacking in hierarchical structures, with proponents around the globe framing actions around the concept of leaderless resistance. Transitioning to the overseas environment, Sunni and Shia-driven terrorist movements worldwide continue to dominate the threat to Americans. ISIS and al-Qaeda continue to aspire to attack U.S. and other Western interests overseas, but have been more effective at pursuing operations against regional and local adversaries. For its part, ISIS in Iraq and Syria remains an intact, centrally led organization that will most likely continue to pose both a global and local threat. This, despite the death of its Emir Haji Abdullah in February. While significantly weaker than its peak in 2015 through 2017, ISIS leaders from Iraq and Syria have been successful at spurning branches and networks across Africa and as far as South and East Asia, with its two most effective branches currently operating out of West Africa and Afghanistan. Likewise, al-Qaeda maintains its regional affiliate structure, positioned effectively in parts of North and East Africa, the Middle East, and to a lesser extent, South Asia. The July death of longtime al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri was a strategic and symbolic setback for the organization, but it does not put an end to al-Qaeda. In particular, in the Middle East, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is a destabilizing actor in Yemen and remains among the most intrepid al-Qaeda affiliates intent on attacks inside the U.S. homeland. Two other prominent al-Qaeda affiliates also stand out, both for their growing regional influence and their significant capabilities: the Sahel-based al-Qaeda affiliate JNIM and Somalia-based affiliate al-Shabaab. Of note, we continue to monitor for signs al-Qaeda has chosen a successor to Zawahiri, now 3 months since his death. In addition to al-Qaeda affiliate leaders, we are particularly focused on the role that Iran-based legacy leaders such as Saif al-Adil may play in the future of the organization. Transitioning from Sunni terrorism to threats emanating from Iran, its partners, and its proxies, Iran continues to plan, encourage, and support plots against the United States, both at home and in the Middle East, where we have a significant U.S. military presence. Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah have sought to plot attacks against former U.S. officials to retaliate for the death of IRGC Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani, raising the threat both at home and abroad for those that Iran deems responsible. In closing, I would just highlight that the complexity of the international terrorism and extremism environment that I just outlined continues to demand a collaborative, agile, and sufficiently resourced counterterrorism effort to mitigate terrorist threats to the United States. It is clear that the significant CT pressure brought to bear against terrorist groups over the last 2 decades, along with investment in effective CT defenses here at home, has resulted in a diminished threat to the United States homeland. NCTC and its CT partners across the government are working toward a sustainable and enduring level of support to this mission that maintains this strategic success. In fact, the role of NCTC today is perhaps more important than ever, charged with integrating and analyzing all terrorism information across the United States government and sharing that information with partners, both foreign and domestic. Organizations like NCTC can help ensure that CT remains a foundational element of national security, even as other organizations must shift to other pressing priorities. Finally, I want to assure this committee that the interagency enterprise of CT practitioners remains committed to this mission and are working behind the scenes every day to protect the American people, both at home and abroad. It is with great gratitude and privilege that I appear before you today and have the opportunity to recognize the incredible community of intelligence, diplomatic, military, and law enforcement professionals whose dedication to the CT mission has done so much to protect this country and its citizens. And with that, Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions.
Thank you, Director Albazad. Yesterday, I released a report following a multi-year investigation on the growing domestic terrorism threat. I believe we provided it to each of the witnesses yesterday. This is also available through the website, the Homeland Security Committee website, to read in its entirety. And in the report, we found that despite being required by law, my investigation found that DHS and FBI have failed to systematically track and report data on domestic terrorism. They have not appropriately allocated resources to match the current threat and have not aligned definitions of domestic terrorism to ensure consistency across the investigations of these crimes. And quite frankly, it's hard to address this rising threat if we can't quantify and define the scope of the problem so that we can tailor an appropriate response to it. And the agencies appear not to be doing that. Director Wray, we have seen think tanks and nonprofits collect more comprehensive data about domestic terrorism attacks than the U.S. government has been able to do. Why has the FBI been unable to collect and report complete data about domestic terrorism despite a federal law requiring you to do so?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know all too well that there have been frustrations in the reports that have been generated under the law that you're referring to. I think we've made progress between the first report and the second report, and we're committed to continuing to make progress. Some of the issues have to do with, if you go further back in time, before 2015, for example, we were using paper as opposed to electronic, and so the ability to go back and track earlier than 2015, I know, has been a source of tension at times. In addition, state and local law enforcement and tribal law enforcement are not required to report domestic terrorism incidents to us, and so while we do get lots of reports of that through our joint terrorism task forces, it's not as systematic as any of us would like it to be. And then you mentioned the terminology change. We have changed terminology over time. There are good reasons for that, but there is some risk then at having sort of an apple to orange type effect in the comparisons. But we're committed to continuing to work with the committee on this topic, and our data tracking limitations should in no way be confused with our commitment to prioritizing this issue. I elevated racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority all the way back in June, I think it was, or the summer of 2019. And we have surged resources to address that. And the pace of investigations and arrests over my first 3.5 years as director, doubled, or in the case of arrests, even tripled in this space. So we have been working hard on it, but we do need more resources in this space. And our fiscal 22 budget specifically asks for more resources to help address the domestic terrorism threat.
Well, I appreciate your work on this, and you're right. The second report was better than the first report, and I would hope that we could work closely together to make the third report even better, because that information is obviously critical for us to understanding the scope of the problem and then design appropriate responses to it. But I appreciate your active engagement in that, Director Wray. I also remain extremely concerned about the threat posed to our nation from bad actors using unmanned aircraft systems, also commonly known as UAS, to disrupt our society, or worse, to potentially conduct a lethal attack on our nation. Earlier this year, this committee unanimously passed a bill authored by Senator Johnson and I to protect our nation's airports, critical infrastructure, and public spaces from these evolving threats. Secretary Mayorkas, as you are well aware, these authorities are set to expire next month on the 16th of December. Could you explain to this committee the consequences of allowing these authorities to lapse?
Chairman Peters, I am deeply appreciative of your and Senator Johnson's bipartisan effort to propose legislation to not only continue our authority to counter unmanned aerial systems, but also to expand it critically. And that need is very grave. Just yesterday, I was meeting with experts who were speaking of the increased efficiency, sophistication, and capability of drones in terms of their visibility, the speed with which they can move, the distance with which they can move, and also the loads that they can carry. And this poses a real threat, and we see it very, very often, sometimes by innocent operators who mistakenly interfere with the airspace and cause aircraft to reroute their journeys, to bad actors, and we see it quite tragically in the war zone that Russia created with its unprovoked assault on Ukraine. These are extraordinarily sophisticated tools that can carry drugs, that can launch weaponry, and we must be able to counter it. It is only an increasing threat, and we hope that Congress passes the legislation that you and Senator Johnson have proposed.
Thank you, Secretary. We have limited time, and I'm going to keep strict to 7 minutes for everybody. Director Wray, the FBI is the lead on protecting mass gatherings like the Super Bowl and other areas. How concerned are you about these authorities lapsing?
We're deeply concerned, and we appreciate this committee's leadership on this topic. If that authority, it's important for Americans to understand that if that authority is not reauthorized next month, that public gatherings, like the Super Bowl in Arizona, like New Year's Eve in Times Square, like Formula One in Las Vegas, and I could go on, none of those things will have protection from this threat. And all the times that we have deployed with the authority that this committee has led the passage of before, we've located hundreds of drones that have been acting in violation of federal law each time. And as the threat continues to grow, we're investigating, even as we speak, several incidents within the U.S. of attempts to weaponize drones with homemade IEDs. And that is the future that is here now, and this authority desperately needs to be reauthorized.
Thank you, Director Wray. With 8 minutes left in my time, Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Senator Johnson for working on a bipartisan basis to put together this legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of it. I know the House has a different view in terms of how I'd like to approach it, but we got to get this one done. I mean, we just heard about the importance of it. So I thank you for both of you for working on this issue. And it's less than a month when it expires, so we've got to move quickly. I spoke in my opening statement about the appreciation we have for the men and women who you represent. We just learned from media accounts that 5 Customs and Border Protection agents were shot, 1 fatally during a vessel interdiction against suspected drug smugglers off the coast of Puerto Rico. This just happened, and our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the family of the agent who was fatally shot, and also with those agents who were wounded. But I think it's a sober reminder of the sacrifices that the individuals who you represent today here make every day, and we owe them our support. It's a dangerous time, and this is an unfortunate example of that. So with regard to the southern border, we've talked a lot about this over the months and years even. You know, how do you take a broken system and fix it? Because clearly, if you look at this chart behind me, it's broken. We have had all kinds of charts in this committee and all kinds of discussions about it. There was an interesting back and forth recently between President Biden's Chief of Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, who works for you, as you know, Mr. Secretary, and the state of Florida. The Attorney General in Florida has a lawsuit against the department with regard to the southern border. And I just thought I'd go over that quickly. This has been the worst year of apprehensions ever, the last fiscal year. But the second worst year was last year. And so these numbers speak for themselves. More than 2 million people apprehended between the ports of entry in 2022. This summer, when the Chief of Border Patrol was questioned by the state of Florida, he gave his answers under oath. And I would ask unanimous consent to place the transcript of the Border Patrol Chief's testimony into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Secretary, I'm going to ask you the same questions that the Chief of Border Patrol was asked to see if you agree with him. And if you could, please just give me a yes or no answer as he did. The first question, is the southern border currently in crisis, yes or no?
Ranking Member Portman, the entire hemisphere is suffering a migration crisis. We are seeing an unprecedented movement of people from country to country. It is not restricted to the southern border. We are seeing an unprecedented movement of people throughout the Western Hemisphere. And I think the case of Venezuela is the most compelling example. Yeah. With a population of between 25 and 28 million people, approximately 8 million of them have left that country. Colombia is hosting 2.4 million Venezuelans.
I would ask you for a yes or an answer with regard to the southern border. I've been to Colombia twice in the last year. Very aware of what's going on with regard to the displaced people out of Venezuela, and for that matter, Nicaragua, Cuba. But the question is all the more pressing. So what are we doing about it? Shouldn't we be changing our policies at the border to deal with it instead of having this result? So my question to you again, is the southern border currently in crisis, yes or no?
We are seeing a significant challenge at the southern border, as we're seeing it throughout the hemisphere.
Chief Ortiz stated yes. So you know, your Border Patrol Chief, but he said the obvious, which is yes. Second question, would you agree that the unprecedented number of unlawful migrants are entering, that an unprecedented number of unlawful migrants are entering the United States right now? Yes or no?
Ranking Member Portman, I believe that the number of encounters that we have had at the border, I think it is approximately 2.3 million this past year, is the highest on record.
Okay, so the answer is yes by Chief Ortiz, and sounds like you agree with him on that. Ms. Secretary, when President Biden took office, is it true that the number of migrants trying to unlawfully enter the United States has increased substantially? Yes or no?
It has, and there are many different factors that that contribute to that.
Okay. Well, I asked you these questions. Obviously, his answer was yes. He was candid and he gave short answers. We can't fix the problem unless we acknowledge it. We can't fix the problem unless we understand the facts.
Yes.
We can't fix the problem unless we're willing to be honest, Republicans, Democrats, everyone alike, saying we've got a crisis. And if we don't fix this crisis at the border, we'll continue to see these same results.
Ranking Member Portman, if I may, there's been a problem with our immigration system, an acknowledged one, unanimously so, for years and years. The system is not
well for years and years, but again, look at this chart. This is the numbers. So it's gotten far worse. And look, we don't have time to go into the details as to how we fix it, but you and I have talked about this a lot, Mr. Secretary. And if the asylum system is not fixed, this won't end. If we don't give the Border Patrol more resources, this is not going to end. If we don't figure out a way to provide for deportations when people are here illegally, particularly when they're committing other crimes, this will continue. So we are, unfortunately, looking at a situation where, you mentioned Colombia, if you go to the countries throughout the hemisphere, they believe this is a pull factor, our policies. And the leadership of these countries actually don't want their people moving into the United States. It might seem counterintuitive to some people, but some of their best and brightest are leaving because of our pull factor, because we're not putting in place the right policies to be able to control our own southern border. So many other questions, and we'll get a chance the second round, I hope, to talk about some of these. With regard to the cyber attacks we talked about earlier, the agencies that have been compromised in some of these attacks concern us greatly. Yesterday, CISA and the FBI issued a joint advisory detailing suspected Iranian government-sponsored actors' compromise of the federal agencies using this Log4 shell vulnerability. I'd ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to include that advisory in the record, so we have it as part of this record. We have discussed this vulnerability at length in this committee. Another example of the issues. My time is expiring here in a second, but can you just tell us, Secretary Mayorkas, what agencies or agency was compromised with regard to this latest announcement you made regarding the Iranian government-sponsored attack?
Ranking Member Portman, that identity has not been disclosed, and I'd need to speak with my colleagues to determine whether I would be compromising any security interest in doing so.
Are you confident that the actors have been expelled from our federal networks?
I will once again to confer with my colleagues to determine the status of the effort by the bad actors.
We are considering, as you know, this FISMA reauthorization. This is the Federal Information Security Modernization Act to trigger cyber incident reporting to Congress. Would this be considered a major incident?
I believe so, Ranking Member Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your 7 minutes of questions.
7? Okay. To each of our witnesses, welcome. It's great to see you all again. Some of you I've known for a while and pretty well. And even though your families, and I just want to say, but just to begin with, we don't do these jobs by ourselves, whether you're on that side of the table or this side of the table. Our families put up with a lot, and we just want to thank your families for sharing you with us, especially as Thanksgiving approaches. First Secretary of Homeland Security was a guy named Tom Ridge from Pennsylvania, from Erie, Pennsylvania. We were both Vietnam veterans. And we were congressmen together, same freshman class. We were governors together for a number of years. He remains a very close friend. And I think back, I joined this committee, I was elected in, oh Lord, I want to see, 22 years ago. And Joe Lieberman said, when I tried to decide what committees to be on, he said, you should try to get on the Governmental Affairs Committee. And I said, well, I'm interested in that. He said, it's just a perfect fit for you, former governor, former state treasurer, care about things working well. And he said, you should join the, and I did. And 2 years later, 9/11 came along, and we ended up, the whole world changed. Our whole world changed. And the nature of the threats that we faced the day that Tom Ridge was sworn into office to be our secretary, and what we face today is unbelievable. It's just incredible how the world has changed in not so good ways. And I just want to say special thanks to each of you and the folks you work with to help us try to address, be ready for the threats that are coming our way almost every day. I'll start with Secretary Mayorkas, and in the second round of questions, if I'm lucky, I'll ask questions of our other two witnesses. But Mr. Secretary, again, my first question is to you. I know your job is not an easy one. Between leading a workforce of almost 250,000 people, whose duties range anywhere from aviation to border security, enhancing our nation's cyber posture, and responding to natural disasters, protecting our homeland. I hope that everyone here today can respect that, and that your dedication and service to our nation is commendable. That goes for all three of our witnesses here today, and I thank you again for your service. As we continue to see a number of encounters at our southern border, the Department of Homeland Security has been leading a whole-of-government response to address these challenges and to help keep our borders more secure. And Mr. Secretary, can you just talk about some of the changes in migration patterns that we've seen at our southern border in the last year and a half, and what policies the department has put in place to address these challenges? Specifically, can you speak to the investments in border technology and legal migration pathways in your level of engagement with other countries in the region, given that the migration patterns have been a hemispheric challenge? Please.
Senator Carper, thank you for acknowledging the challenge that these positions present. Of course, the challenge is all relative. Ranking Member Portman mentioned the tragic loss of one of our frontline personnel. Several other were gravely wounded. I was briefed on the situation very early this morning. These are brave members of our air and marine operations within U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So the difficulty of this job cannot be compared to the difficulty that our frontline personnel face every day, and their bravery and selfless service should be recognized. And I appreciate Ranking Member Portman acknowledging that. The migration patterns in the hemisphere have changed dramatically. When I was the Deputy Secretary, we were very concerned about migration from the Central American countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We have encountered now the highest level of encounters by Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans. And that changed demographic makes the challenge even more acute because our diplomatic relations with these countries is obviously quite strained, and we're unable to remove as easily individuals from these countries of origin. Of course, we implemented thus far at an early stage a very successful response to the Venezuelan migration in particular. We have 6 lines of effort, Senator Carper. We have surged resources to the southern border: personnel, technology, facilities, transportation capabilities. We have increased our processing efficiency. We're increasingly digitizing our processes, modernizing them so that the intake process and the screening and vetting process is enhanced and more efficient. We are delivering consequences for unlawful entry. We have increased the level of prosecution of illegal entry when individuals seek to evade law enforcement. We have sought to bolster the capacity of non-governmental organizations and state and local jurisdictions. We are conducting an unprecedented disruption campaign against the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations. And we are also working very closely with our partners to the south to deter irregular migration. The declaration that was signed in the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles several months ago speaks powerfully of that. We need countries throughout the hemisphere to enforce their laws of humanitarian relief as well as their laws of enforcement. And so this is a multi-pronged effort to address a multinational challenge throughout the hemisphere.
Thank you for that response. Most of us are people of faith, and there's a verse of scripture in Matthew 25 that I think a lot of us are familiar with about the least of these. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? when I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? The last one's hard. In fact, they're all pretty difficult, but the last one is especially hard. We, in an effort to try to reduce the likelihood that people are going to risk life and limb to come to this country and relocate here, when you leave, in some cases, the hellacious conditions in which they live, they come many miles, hundreds of miles sometimes, to reach our borders. And some of us think that why don't we give them the opportunity, if they want to come here, to actually go to our embassies or our consulates and let those intentions be known and to work from there. Would you respond to that idea, please, just briefly?
Senator Carper, our laws are laws of humanitarian relief and laws of accountability. We have an asylum system that is one of the sources of pride of our country, and we enforce the law. When an individual qualifies for humanitarian relief, they are, under the law, entitled to remain here. And if they do not qualify, they are to be removed, and we are enforcing the laws in every respect.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, you made a comment here in answer to the chairman's questioning that you are committed to working with this committee. You'll excuse me if I find those words ring incredibly hollow. I had to subpoena you as chairman of this committee. I really didn't get anything. I've written repeated letters, either with no response whatsoever or a non-response response. It's one of the reasons, and I'm very grateful to all the whistleblowers that are coming forward to various committees, to various members, people of integrity within your organizations, blowing the whistle on the corruption at some of the highest levels of the FBI. First question, do you commit publicly that the FBI will not retaliate against those whistleblowers?
Senator, we will not retaliate against whistleblowers. I take the protections that are in law and regulation of whistleblowers extremely seriously.
Good, we'll hold you to that. Okay,
just like
next.
I take compliance with all of our other rules very seriously.
Senator Grassley wrote you a letter on July 25th of 2020 in which he said that whistleblowers to his office reported that FBI officials initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden for the purpose of shutting down investigatory activity related to his potential criminal exposure by labeling it, quote, disinformation. Boy, that's a familiar term. That scheme was hatched in August of 2020. Also included, he said, in August 2020, FBI supervisory intelligence analyst Brian Auten opened an assessment which was used by FBI headquarters team to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as disinformation and cause investigative activity to cease. Have you responded to Senator Grassley's letter that he wrote over 3 months ago?
Senator, I know there have been a whole slew of letters. I believe we've responded to a number of them, but sitting here right now, I can't tell you which ones
you have not
responded to and which ones.
Have you looked into those charges that there was a scheme hatched in August 2020 to downplay the derogatory information on Hunter Biden? Have you looked into that personally?
We have, as we speak, a number of personnel matters that are underway, and as reasons I'm sure you can appreciate, we can't discuss.
I know that's always your excuse. No, I got it. I understand how you remain above the law by using that excuse repeatedly. The reason I'm a little sensitive on August 2020 is that on August 6th, both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent, I think.
It's just
it's
bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a response.
We offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, there is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president.
Well, there are
Office of the Director.
There are
of National
persons in that interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing? The persons then.
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very easy. It's very easy.
What I would say
it's a very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence, although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation. Are you aware of the FBI having any involvement whatsoever in the October 19, 2020 public statement by 51 former intelligence officials?
I'm not aware of any involvement by the FBI in what you're describing.
The reason I ask is if it's true that in August of 2020, the FBI initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden, it would seem like maybe part of that scheme would be to get intelligence officials to issue a letter that stated that the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. That was totally false. We now know that the Hunter laptop is completely authentic. The point I'm trying to make here is the unsolicited briefing that was leaked in May of 2021 was used to smear me and interfered into the U.S. Senate election of November 2022. One of the whistleblowers to my committee has stated that the FBI was no longer going to interfere in elections, something to that effect. I can't find it right now, and I'm running out of time. Oh, here it is. The FBI is, quote, not going to change the outcome of the election again. Well, the FBI certainly tried to by leaking, or somebody leaked that FBI briefing. Are you going to investigate that? Because that is the election interference. And let's face it, this letter by 51 intelligence officials, this interfered in the 2020 election to a far greater extent than anything Russia or China ever could have hoped to accomplish. You have to acknowledge that. It has to be investigated. I have no faith that you will do so.
Senator Hassan, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Peters, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Portman for holding this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. And I want to add my prayers and thoughts for the CBP officers, the officer who was fatally wounded and those who are gravely wounded, and to their families. I think it's fair to say that the people of New Hampshire and the United States are holding these brave men and women in our prayers. I also wanted to take the opportunity, although he has stepped out for a moment, just to thank Ranking Member Portman for his years of service and for his work on this committee and for the bipartisan work that he has led. And again, to all of the witnesses, but more importantly to the men and women you lead, Thank you, to them, their families. The first priority of government is to ensure the safety and security of its citizens, and your work is really critical to that mission. Director Abizaid, I want to start with a question to you and then a follow-up to the other two witnesses. When we held this hearing a year ago, some assessments indicated that in the wake of the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, al-Qaeda would have the ability to reconstitute itself and threaten the United States homeland within 1 to 2 years. Here we are 1 year later. To the extent that you can discuss it in an unclassified setting, what is the National Counterterrorism Center's assessment of al-Qaeda's capability to threaten the U.S. homeland?
Thank you very much for the question. Al-Qaeda's capability to threaten the United States homeland from Afghanistan is quite limited, in part thanks to the operation that killed Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul here recently, but also because the al-Qaeda elements that are still present in Afghanistan are really not focused on external operations as far as we can tell. There are other terrorist elements in Afghanistan that we are concerned about, primarily ISIS's branch there, ISIS Khorasan. But the threat from al-Qaeda should be disaggregated from that, I think, given the very unique circumstances around that group, its relationship with the Taliban, and some of the specifics in which it has evolved over the years.
Well, thank you. Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas, do you agree with this assessment, and what are your agencies doing to mitigate the threat? And I'll start with you, Director Wray.
I would add a couple things to what Director Abizaid had to say. One is we're obviously very concerned about ISIS-K as one of the threats. Second, I think as time progresses, I am concerned that we will have fewer and fewer good sources of information about what al-Qaeda is or isn't doing in Afghanistan. So we always have to be mindful of, as Secretary Rumsfeld famously said, the known unknown. That goes there. And then third, we are very concerned about al-Qaeda and ISIS's ability to inspire attacks even from over there. So those are a few points that I would add.
Thank you. Secretary?
Senator, I think the point that my colleagues have made underscores a broader point, which is that we've spoken about the evolving threats, but we should keep in mind that the threats of the past remain the threats of the present. Only new ones have been added. And so I defer to the experts to my left.
Thank you. Now, Secretary Mayorkas, I want to move on to a different topic. Every week, a new drug seizure along the border makes headlines, but the flow of drugs across the southwest border is unrelenting. The drugs that DHS seizes accounts for just a fraction of the total that criminal organizations attempt to smuggle into our country. What specific steps is DHS taking to stem the flow of drugs crossing the border? And what additional resources are you using to address this problem? What additional resources do you need?
Senator, thank you so much. So it is a fact that the smugglers seek to transport controlled substances, illegal drugs into the United States, primarily through the ports of entry, through trucks, vehicles, and the like. And what we have done is we have surged technological resources that can most effectively detect the effort to smuggle those dangerous substances into our country. Specifically, for example, non-intrusive inspection technology, which has remarkable X-ray capabilities that can be implemented very, very swiftly. We have deployed forward operating labs so personnel scientists can detect the controlled substances and we can effect the seizure immediately and refer to law enforcement the persons who have sought to smuggle them. What we need is more resources like that, and we really hope that Congress passes our fiscal year 2023 budget. We are already 6 weeks into the new fiscal year without the resources that we need financially to invest in that technology and deploy additional personnel as well.
Thank you. One additional question, I think, given my time to you, Secretary Mayorkas. Over the last few years, cyber attacks have plagued state and local governments and other public entities. Toward that end, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure laws, Senator Cornyn and I helped create a federal grant program for state and local entities to improve their cybersecurity. The application period for the first year of the grant program concluded just this past Tuesday. I understand that the Department of Homeland Security is still reviewing applications, but can you explain what the department's goals are for this first year of grants and how you intend to achieve them?
We are so grateful for that grant program. It's a multi-billion-dollar grant program over several years. This first year of its implementation, we are dedicating $185 million in resources to state and local governments. This is all about building their capacity to enhance the security of the cyber ecosystem. In cybersecurity, Senator, we say we are only as strong as our weakest link. And the fact of the matter is that there are target-rich and resource-poor localities that we need to strengthen. Right. And that is what this grant program is going to enable us to do.
So your goal really right now is making sure that the state and local governments that have applied get the resources they need and really focus on strengthening that level of cyber security. Is that fair to say is a priority there?
Yes, it is, Senator.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hessen. Senator Paul, you're recognized for your questions.
Director Wray, is Facebook or any other social media company supplying private messages or data on American users that is not compelled by the government or the FBI?
Not compelled. In other words, not in response to legal process.
No warrant, no subpoena. They're just supplying you information on their users.
I don't believe so, but I can't sit here and be sure of that as I sit here.
Can you give us a yes or no by going back to your team and asking, because it's a very specific question, because if they are, it's against the law. The law, the Stored Communications Act, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986 prohibits providers from sharing electronic communications with any person or entity unless it's compelled. This was done to protect the privacy of people so we could feel like we can send an email or direct message to people without having that information given over. It's a very specific question. Will you get with your team of lawyers and give us a specific answer? Because this is the law. If you're doing it, then we need to go to court to prevent you from receiving this information.
Well, I can tell you that I'm quite confident we're following the law, but what I will also
Well, that's not the answer. That's not the answer.
But I will also follow up with you to make sure that we get you more information, more detailed information.
Is the FBI obtaining anonymous social media data and then using technical methods to pierce the anonymous nature of the data?
Anonymous social media data?
So you purchase data. People purchase data all the time, and we sort of tolerate it for advertising and things because it's anonymous data. Are you purchasing what is said to be anonymous data through the marketplace and then piercing the anonymous nature to attach individual names to that data?
Right. But when you asked about anonymous data, I was thinking more in terms of...
No, I'm talking about data that is out there. And are you purchasing data and then piercing the anonymous nature of that data?
So the manner in which we usually use the term commercial data is probably longer than I could explain here. But again, let me have a
so you aren't prepared. You will not answer the question of whether or not you're attaching names to anonymous data.
I think it's a more complicated answer than I can give here.
So far we're 0 for 2 with getting you to answer this, but you're pledging you will actually answer the question, because you have to realize the frustration. We'll write you a letter and your team of lawyers will write back a 15-page letter that says nothing, and you won't answer the question. These are very specific. This is whether you're obeying the law, whether we can have confidence. I want to have confidence in the FBI.
We are obeying the law.
Well, you're saying that, but we won't tell us the answer.
I said
so. So you have to say yes.
That's not what I said.
No, you aren't telling me the answer, and the answer is: are you collecting data not compelled by a warrant? That would not be in compliance with the law, but you won't answer that you're not collecting that data.
I said two things. One, we're following the law, and second, that we would have somebody follow up with you with more detailed specific.
So those are two specific questions. Are you getting data from them that's not compelled? And then are you piercing the anonymous nature of that technically? Are you receiving private messages from social media companies through the use of confidential human sources? from Facebook, social media companies. You have people working over there who you're paying or who are volunteering to give you information, even though it would be against the law for Facebook to do this. But now you're saying, well, we'll get around the law by using confidential human sources.
You mean, just to be clear, I'm following the question, you mean, in effect, recruiting a human source inside the company?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I don't believe so. I think what we have had situations where we have confidential human sources, not employees of those companies, but who report to us on their own communication. So if the two of us had a communication and Secretary Mayorkas was a human source, he could report to us about what he is saying to me.
Once again, I'd like the answer to be more specific from your team. Not that I don't believe so, but that you are or are not using human confidential resources within Facebook. So we get back to the idea of whether or not you're getting information for them outside the warrant process, because the next question is, which you probably won't answer either, is, are you taking information that you're getting not through the warrant process and then going around and coming back and using that as a predicate for getting a warrant to actually get the information you've already been given?
I'm not sure I'm completely following the...
Basically, you get information that Facebook's volunteering. This has all been written up in the Post article. You're familiar with the Post article with the accusations. And the question is, are you getting information they're giving to you? They say, oh, somebody says January 6th was great. Here's information on this guy. Then you're taking it and then using it as a predicate to say, well, now let's go to the court and get a real warrant and get the information we already actually got without a warrant.
So we get tips and leads from all over the place, from members of the public, from businesses, from community leaders, from other and government partners all the time. And we use the tips and leads that we get to often form predicates for law.
Are you getting tips and leads from Facebook and social media companies?
We get tips and leads from companies, absolutely.
Right. And includes private information.
I'm not aware of us receiving any tips or leads.
Because see, here's the point: you may think it's just jolly well to get all this stuff without a warrant that people volunteer to you, but many of us are alarmed that you're getting this information that are private communications between people because it is against the law. It's against the law for Facebook or social media companies to give it to you, but it's also against the law for you to receive it. So you're going to have to very specifically go back with your team and search over whether you're doing it, not just say, we're probably not, we obey the law, we're good people. Well, no, there are doubts because this has been reported. Even the FBI, when you responded to the New York Post article, said that companies are referring information to the FBI with investigative value relating to foreign malign influence. Now, there'd probably be a great deal more tolerance about that if it's foreign malign influence. But the question is, are you also receiving information on so-called domestic? But what would that mean? Is someone questioning whether paper ballots are an accurate way of running election? Is that good enough for you to be getting our private information because we have a political beef with the way votes are counted or recorded in our country? Is that something that you're collecting information on? Are they giving you information on private things that you've told them, well, people who question the election, we want to hear about these people, and so then they're giving you this information? Are you receiving information?
I'll give you two classic examples that I think happen with some frequency. One, if we supply information to, say, Facebook or any number of other technology companies about foreign accounts, Russian intelligence service, for example, accounts, when they then look in their system for those accounts, they often find other accounts related to those, and they provide tips and leads back to us about those. That's one example. A second would be a situation where a technology company encounters a threat of violence on their platform, on their services, and they provide tips and leads to us, and we follow up on those threats of violence.
And there's not a lot of disagreement about that. The question is when we start to talk about political speech. And that is the question, are you receiving things that could be interpreted? And we'd want to know, and if you're not going to admit to us, whether it's political speech, someone who questions the election, someone who is mad about something that is going on, but it's not saying they're directly going to commit violence. They're mad about things. What the New York Post article said is, yes, you're getting this. And then when they're finally read in context, and this is from a whistleblower, which makes us suspect you're not being forthcoming or honest with us, is that whistleblowers are saying you are receiving this information from Facebook and others, and that you are going around the Constitution then to come back and try to get warrants for it. But then once you read it, there's been no actionable intelligence on this, but this is an active program that you've got. You work for the government. You should admit to us whether or not you have a program going after our speech.
Thank you, Senator Paul.
We investigate violence, not speech.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Langford, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all three of you and the service that you give to the country on this. We do have lots of questions just about process and how things are going on this. Secretary Mayorkas, you and I have talked about Title 42 for about 18 months. And I've asked you the question, what happens when Title 42 goes away? And for 18 months, you've said, we're working on it. Well, Judge Sullivan just stepped in and unilaterally canceled out Title 42. So we're in this very odd situation right now where DHS is in one court asking to extend Title 42 a little longer, and in another court asking to cancel Title 42 altogether. But we're still waiting to try to figure out what happens now and how many people are about to cross the border. What's the plan for dealing with this mass migration, illegal immigration coming now post-Title 42?
Senator, what we requested of Judge Sullivan in the District Court of D.C. was an orderly wind-down period of 35 days, and which was unopposed and which was granted by the court. What we are doing is precisely what we announced we would do in April of this year, and we have indeed been executing on the plan. It's a six different lines of effort, and I will review them very, very quickly given the limited time. Surging resources to the southern border, including personnel, technology, facilities capabilities, and transportation, medical support. 2, increasing our Customs and Border Protection processing efficiency to mitigate potential overcrowding. We've been digitizing, for example, our electronic A files, the immigration files, when individuals are placed in proceedings. We are 3, enhancing the consequences for unlawful entry, especially with respect to individuals who seek to evade law enforcement, including removal, detention, and criminal prosecution when warranted. 4, we are seeking to bolster the capacity of nonprofit organizations, state and local officials, and working very closely with them. 5th, we are targeting and disrupting the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations. In fact, we have effected more than 5,000 arrests and more than 6,000 disruption events. And that means arrests of individuals, the breakdown of smuggling of stash houses, the seizure of the instrumentalities that these smuggling organizations use. And 6, we're working with our partners to the south to deter irregular migration. And I spoke earlier in response to Ranking Member Portman's question about the fact that this is a tremendous hemispheric challenge. We are seeing the movement of people, and the demographics of the population that we are encountering at the border has changed dramatically.
It has, and there's a couple of big challenges in this. One is the numbers just came in for October. It's the 3rd highest number in recorded history. So while those things were implemented, the numbers continue to accelerate, and this goes back to the estimates when Title 42 goes away. There was an expectation from Intel to be able to say these numbers will surge even greater. You built a Venezuelan policy on trying to be able to deter Venezuelans based on Title 42. That just went away. And so what we're trying to figure out is what is the plan? Because the plan you just articulated has led to the 3rd highest number for any single month in history.
So there are a few points, if I may, Senator, and thank you. Number one, the number of encounters is not equal to the number of unique individuals.
Correct. Yeah, we know that. Yep.
Is Title 42 creates a potential for the ease of recidivism, number one. Number 2, we're working with our partners to the south, with Mexico, with respect to the end of Title 42, and whether we will be able to continue our thus far successful program with respect to Venezuelan nationals and use our Title 8 authorities. But we also have other opportunities ahead of us because, as we sought to do earlier, and we will resume this effort, is an enhanced use of expedited removal, which is a Title 8 authority. So we're looking at our consequence regimes and how we can most effectively employ them.
A lot of people counting on these numbers coming down, and they're not. They're going up, and they continue to be able to rise. And so while we're examining these things and looking at it, the numbers continue to rise on this with the end of Title 42 coming in 35 days. We expect it's going to accelerate even higher. There is an expectation that your department is going to change this number dramatically. Let me ask a point-blank question that's challenging on this. what percentage of the individuals that are encountered at our southern border do we know their criminal history from the country they're coming from? I'm not talking about if they have an American criminal history or they're on our terror watch list, that we know their criminal history of the country they're coming from. Do we know that history?
I will have to get back to you on that, Senator, whether we have the capability of identifying the percentage, which is what you have.
It is my understanding that we don't know the criminal history of the vast majority. Can you give me an estimate on this? I'm not asking for a 0.8%, but give me a guess.
I understand. I'm quite hesitant to guess on information that is so important to our mission, but I will certainly get back to you with whatever information we can provide.
It is incredibly important because I think there's an assumption that the American people feel that the 2 million plus individuals that were encountered just in the last 12 months have been vetted in some way at our southern border or they've been checked. And we don't know if these individuals are fleeing poverty or fleeing from the law.
Oh, if I
We
may,
don't know. I mean, there is a check to see if they have an American criminal history record, but we don't know if they have a criminal history record or where they're coming from.
So as my colleagues here will attest as well, Senator, we conduct screening and vetting of individuals whom we encounter. We have a robust screening and vetting process. It actually is recurrent vetting, and it is not just with respect to criminal history in the United States.
I'd like to give in a good guess of how many people we know their criminal history when they come in then.
As I mentioned, Senator, I'll get back to you and see if we have that data, and if so, I will certainly provide it to you.
That would be great. Thank you. We have asked your team, and you and I have talked about it before, about the information for the MPP and the decision-making process for the Remain in Mexico policy on this. We asked about that for a while. We just recently got a letter back saying that there are no responsive documents that have been withheld. Basically, you have everything that we would have, but the implication then is the decision-making process of who qualifies for the MPP and who does not was left up to a case-by-case basis, and there are no guidance documents. I find that hard to believe that there were no guidance documents given to anyone on your team anywhere along the border on how to be able to decide, yet your team is so far telling me, hey, we don't have anything. We never printed anything. I find that exceptionally hard to believe. I'd like to be able to follow up and be able to get access to those documents.
I look forward to discussing that with you because I certainly have some very important points to make in response to your concern.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
First, Secretary Mayorkas, thanks for your calls around the hurricanes. And I've had a very positive experience with FEMA. So I think you have a great team there, and everybody there does a good job.
Thank you, Senator.
And I think the last time, Director Wray, you testified, I had the opportunity afterwards to go to West Virginia to see, and I think I would just want to compliment you on what you've done to revamp the call center operation. I know I'm sure it's still hard to catch everything that goes on out there, but I want to thank you for that. Secretary Mayorkas, you know that I've been disappointed at the border. It just seems like it's open. We've got all this fentanyl come across. We've got people dying. But here's my question, and I don't know, Secretary Mayorkas or Director Wray, if you want to answer it. It's been reported that the Chinese Communist Party are operating police stations in the United States in an effort to surveil Chinese dissidents. It seems obvious the U.S. shouldn't allow its most significant geopolitical rival, an oppressive communist regime, to establish police stations in the U.S. What authority or jurisdiction does the CCP have in the U.S.? And I don't know which one wanted to testify.
Well, Senator, like you, I'm very concerned about this. We are aware of the existence of these stations. I had to be careful about discussing our specific investigative work, but to me, it is outrageous to think that the Chinese police would attempt to set up shop, in New York, let's say, without proper coordination. It violates sovereignty and circumvents standard judicial and law enforcement cooperation processes. And the reason this is so important is because we have seen a clear pattern of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, exporting their repression right here into the U.S. And we've had now a number of indictments that you may have seen of the Chinese engaging in uncoordinated quote-unquote law enforcement action right here in the United States, harassing, stalking, surveilling, blackmailing people who they just don't like or who disagree with the Xi regime. And so it's a real problem, and it's something that we're talking with our foreign partners about as well, because we're not the only country where this has occurred.
They don't have any right to be here, right?
Well, we're looking into the legal parameters of it. So I want to be a little bit careful not to get out over my skis on that. But suffice to say, I can tell you from an FBI director perspective, I'm deeply concerned about this, and I'm not going to just let it lie.
Okay. Secretary, does it impact Homeland Security at all?
Well, of course, the threat of China is one of the most significant threats that we face in the homeland. It's not only a matter of national security; it's a matter of homeland security in a number of arrays, in a number of areas of our mission.
Do you think you have the ability to shut them down? Do you know if you have the right to shut them down?
I would have to defer to the Department of Justice with respect to the
It would go to Justice, not Homeland Security? Okay. So it would be under FBI?
Well, or to the extent that the remedies might be some part of the Justice Department outside the FBI, that could also be a possibility. And then there may be a State Department dimension to this that we're looking into.
So when you know they're here, do you know if they're surveilling U.S. citizens? Do you know that yet? Do you have enough information to know if they are?
Well, again, I don't want to get too far into our ongoing investigative work, but as I said, we have seen plenty of situations in the past where the Chinese government, under the pretext of going after corruption, have essentially used that as a vehicle to surveil. We've had situations where they've planted bugs inside Americans' cars, for example. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more is them hiring private investigators here in the U.S. to essentially be their agents, if you will, to conduct some of this work. So this is something we're trying to call out, and it's important that Chinese Americans and Chinese dissidents who are here know to call the FBI to report when they think they may have been targeted with this conduct.
Because you probably can't talk about it in here, I'd like to get a classified briefing on what they're doing. So at some point, so whenever it works out for you guys.
We'd be happy to set that up.
So Director Wray, so what I'm asking you to tell me if it's accurate or not. So I'm not suggesting that all this is accurate. But it appears that DOJ have become politicized with regard to pro-life things. So there's a recent rise in high-profile FBI investigations of pro-life Americans, which raises the current concern that the FBI is weaponizing federal law enforcement and has become a tool, a partisan tool, which I don't think, when we've talked, that's been your goal. So there appears to be investigations that arrest of the pro-life community, and it's just the opposite of what's happened. We've had numerous firebombings, violent attacks, acts of vandalism against churches, pro-life organizations, and crisis pregnancy centers in the days following the leaks of the Dobbs opinion. So is this right? Is that happening, not happening?
Well, first let me say, I firmly believe that the FBI is going about its work and doing the right thing in the right way. Now, I'm glad you raised this topic because it gives me an opportunity to speak to it. We have my view, plainly expressed to all of our people, including in the context of abortion-related violence, is that I don't care what side of the issue you're on, you don't get to engage in violence. And we are equal opportunity when it comes to that. Now, we have quite a number of investigations as we speak into attacks or threats against pregnancy resource centers, faith-based organizations, and other pro-life organizations. And you might be interested to know that since the Dobbs Act decision, probably in the neighborhood of 70% of our abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life. So where the victims are pro-life organizations. And we're going after that through our joint terrorism task forces, through our criminal authorities, FACE Act, and things like that. We have about 20 field offices involved in this. And so we take it very seriously. And again, I don't care whether you're motivated by pro-life views or pro-choice views, you don't get to use violence to express it.
So we've talked about this before. It just seems to me that in DOJ, FBI in particular, they might be doing the right thing, but you guys allow information to to go out there and not talk about what you're doing. Because if you read the press, you would think that you guys are only going after pro-life groups and not going after groups that attack pro-life. So I've never understood this about the FBI and DOJ, in that you guys aren't more proactive about what you're actually doing. Because I'm pro-law enforcement, as you know, and so, but I can't defend you with no information.
Senator, I think we don't have the time for me to tell you how frustrated I sometimes get by some of the news reporting about our work and the misreporting about our work. The circumspection that we display with regard to discussing our investigations is based on rules and practices that are important to people having confidence in the integrity of our work and go back decades in multiple administrations. And sometimes it can be very frustrating to agents on the ground when they see things being misreported about their work. But we have all been taught that we have to bite our lips and let the facts come out in the right way through court proceedings. And sometimes that can be very frustrating to us, and it sounds like to you too.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Scott.
Can I just finish something?
We'll have a second round, real quick.
I just want to, it makes it hard for us, right? Because people come to us with saying, oh yeah, they must have done that. So,
thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Hawley is deferred to Senator Romney. Senator Romney, you are recognized for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hawley. I appreciate the chance to be able to ask a few questions. Director Wray, I begin by saying how much I appreciate the work of your agents and how much I respect them and how convinced I am of their quality. One of my sons years ago interviewed to become a member of the FBI. He was turned down. He was able to go on and get a degree at Harvard Business School and has done quite well, so he survived. But we learned from that experience that the qualifications for getting into the FBI are high indeed, as they should be. And I have great respect for the men and women who work for the FBI. There is a great deal of discussion about the political orientation of the FBI. My experience with your organization is that is not the case by and large. I'm sure there are individuals among the 38,000 who work with you who have political points of view. May leak things and may do things from time to time that are not appropriate, and I hope that you're able to evaluate them and evaluate where those come from and correct them. Can you give us a sense of how the resources of the FBI are directed? How much goes into looking at violent crimes of various kinds and human trafficking? How much goes into terrorist-related prevention? The kinds of, if you will, are there categories of effort that are carried out? Because I think there's a public perception that the whole FBI, we had to defund it because it's only doing political work. What is the FBI doing? Where are the resources devoted?
So if you were to look at our allocation of resources, and I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head, but if you were to look at the allocation of our resources, you would see that the single largest chunk is devoted to traditional criminal programs, and of which the violent crime is by far and away the biggest. And we have safe streets task forces all over the country. We have transnational organized crime task forces all over the country. We have violent crimes against children task forces. So those remain our bread and butter. Those remain our biggest programs. We do have unique responsibility for national security threats as well. And so if you were to look at our strategy, you might see the national security threats listed first, because those are places where if we don't do it, no one will, right? Whereas violent crime, crimes against children, we work much more shoulder to shoulder with our state and local law enforcement partners. So a lot of times those national security threats, terrorism, counterintelligence work, cybercrime, get most of to Senator Scott's point, the media attention. But in, day out, the FBI that most Americans and certainly most law enforcement professionals and I talk to chiefs and sheriffs every week, the FBI they experience most is really more focused on the traditional criminal stuff.
Yeah, thank you. You've spoken a great deal about the cyber attacks from state actors from China as well as non-state actors. Secretary Mayorkas has spoken about that as well. I don't know that it's possible to, through a process of defending against attacks, to prevent all the potential attacks and all the theft that will come from our businesses and into our government. it strikes me that the only effective way to stop the attacks that come from of a cyber nature is to attack back, that the best defense is a good offense. And I know your respective organizations are not responsible for the offensive side of this, but to get China to stop attacking, they've got all these private enterprises that are doing these attacks into our systems. Fighting against all these things will never stop it unless China recognizes that if they don't stop it, that they're going to be hurt more than we are. Do you believe we have a sufficient effort in an offensive effort to push back against the cyber attacks that come from state and non-state actors? And should we expand on that? And where should that reside? And I'll ask both Director Wray as well as Secretary Mayorkas and Director Abisad to respond.
So certainly when it comes to offense is a critical part of our overall effort to push back against cyber adversaries. In addition to some of the offensive cyber operations that we probably couldn't talk about in this kind of setting, there's actually a lot of progress being made in what I obliquely referred to earlier as joint sequenced operations, where we, with our partners, intelligence community partners, law enforcement partners, foreign partners, go with the whole 2 + 2 to make 5 kind of effect. So we're going after the adversary's infrastructure, we're going after their cryptocurrency, we're going after the individual actors. Some of them we can extradite, some of them we can have charged there. We're engaging in other sort of more sensitive counterintelligence type work to amplify those effects. But what we have found is that when we go after the actors, the infrastructure, and the money all simultaneously, we can degrade and disrupt their effectiveness. I think that is really ultimately the real goal, is to degrade, disrupt, and defend in that way. In some ways, the deterrence model is harder. Much the same way we're not going to deter the Chinese or the Russians from spying, but we can make it hellishly difficult for them to do it. And that's what we're after now, is imposing risks and consequences on the adversaries to hit them where it hurts, to make it harder and harder for them to really come after us with cyber means.
Thank you.
If I may, Senator, add a point, because of course I don't need to speak of the criticality of a strong defense, and you are of course focused on offensive behavior. A few weeks ago, I was in Singapore to speak to our allies in the Indo-Pacific region about the importance, or I should say, the peril of having China own or operate other nations' critical infrastructure, and the perils it presents from a cybersecurity and other security perspectives. And it was a very important dialogue, not only with our Singaporean partners, our Japanese partners, but other countries in the region, because China is very aggressive in seeking to own or operate the infrastructure in telecommunications and other technologies.
Thank you. Director, yes.
Senator, I would just say, I'll defer to my colleagues on the cyber-specific piece of your question, but what I would say from a counterterrorism community perspective, there's so much that we have learned as a collaborative community about both offense and defense at the same time, that those lessons learned applied to things like transnational organized crime or cyber threats, I think really position us well as a government to take it to the threat actors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Director Wray, let me start with you if I could. I think the last time that I got to visit with you was back in August 4th of this year. You were at the Senate Judiciary Committee. You remember that, I assume. We had to cut that hearing short. We were supposed to do 2 rounds of questions. You said you had to be somewhere, so we cut it short. Republicans were not able to ask a second round as we had been informed we would. The press reported shortly thereafter that the reason that the hearing had to be cut short is because you were flying on a Gulfstream jet for a personal vacation in the Adirondacks. Please tell me that's not accurate.
Senator, the hearing was not cut short from my experience. We had agreed beforehand on the time and length of it, and I was very surprised to find that anyone on the committee was surprised. As to how I fly, I am required, not only permitted, but required to fly on an FBI plane wherever I go.
So you were going on vacation?
I was, yes.
So you left a statutorily required oversight hearing in order to go on a personal vacation in the Adirondacks?
I took a flight to go visit my family, as had been previously arranged in conjunction with the leadership of the committee.
The ranking member, Chuck Grassley, asked you during the hearing, he said, I assume you must have other business. You said, yes. He then said, if you have a business trip, you've got your own plane, can't it wait a while? He then said, Chuck Grassley, we only just heard half an hour ago that now you have to leave. We were going to have a 7-minute round followed by a 3-minute round. I've got 7 people on my side of the aisle, that included me, who are waiting for this additional round. Is there any reason we can't accommodate them for 21 minutes? And you said you had a plane to catch. You had somewhere to go. And now we find out it was for vacation?
The reference to other business was not a reference to that day.
Bullshit. He lied under oath. Wrap him up right now. He lied to Congress.
Iowa,
you got it, boys.
Other business in Iowa.
Get him.
I did, in fact, see him then.
So wait, you had to leave the hearing early because you're going to see him later in Iowa in a week?
No, I had to leave when I said I was going to have to leave, as had been previously organized with the leadership of the committee.
You left an oversight hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee required by statute so you could vacation with your family. I find that absolutely unbelievable and, frankly, indefensible. Now, is it your practice to use government planes? You say you do this all the time. You flew in a Gulfstream 550, I think, that was originally purchased for counterterrorism purposes. You were using it to go to, what is it, Saranac Lake? Is that how I say it? I've never been there. Is that the right pronunciation? Saranac Lake? That was your destination?
Yes.
So, did you enjoy the flight? I mean, did you pay for it?
Yes, I paid for it.
Will you turn over all receipts and reimbursement to this committee?
Senator, we will be happy to comply with oversight requests related to the use of the plane, as I said, and it's important for people to understand.
Why don't you just give me a yes? Will you turn over the receipts for your flight?
I will turn over the information related to my use of the plane. The use of the plane, I am required, not just permitted, required, even for personal travel, to use the FBI plane.
How convenient for you.
And I pay every single time that I use the plane for personal
I'm glad it's available for you to jet away from your statutorily required hearings and oversight before this Congress, where you denied the ability of members of Congress to ask you questions because you had to go on a personal vacation using a government plane. Let's just look at some of the things while you've been vacationing that your FBI has been doing. According to numerous whistleblowers who have come forward to members of this body, to members of the House, the FBI has been sending more than, in one instance, a dozen armed agents to a rural Pennsylvania home of a Catholic pro-life demonstrator to arrest him at gunpoint in front of his children in early morning hours, despite the fact that he posed no risk of violence or threat and had previously offered to turn himself in. Numerous whistleblowers, field agents, have alleged that D.C., your headquarters, has pulled them off working on child sex abuse cases, working on human trafficking cases, in order to work on January 6th matters for this reason, to give the appearance, they say, that there are hundreds of new domestic terrorism cases in the country, when in fact there are not. Whistleblowers, field agents have also said that D.C. has ordered the use of SWAT teams on nonviolent suspects who may have attended a January 6th rally, and they have been ordered to conduct surveillance and knock on doors of people who were not even in D.C. on January 6th. And again, all of this, according to the whistleblowers, these are your agents, all of this in order to make it look as if there's a mass surge in domestic terrorism all across the country, when in fact, the stats are being padded by political directive in your office. They also say, these whistleblowers, the D.C. leadership deliberately suppressed investigations into Hunter Biden, contrary to FBI procedure, and have also retaliated against FBI agents and whistleblowers who have contacted Congress, which, by the way, they are protected by statute to do so. This is what's happening at your FBI while you are evading oversight hearings. Mr. Director, do you think you're still up to this job?
I absolutely think I'm still up to this job, and I think our workforce feels the same way.
Well, I don't. And frankly, I think you should have been gone a long time ago. And given your behavior recently, I think it only makes it more clear. Are there any travel plans today that we should be aware of that you have? We're supposed to have a second round. Will you be here for that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
I can say with 100% certainty what he said about sending FBI agents to people's homes to question them about being in D.C. when it's widely known that they weren't in D.C., like when they were live streaming from their studio in Atlanta. Adam? Yeah.
With my questions for extending TPS to several countries last week is going to provide critical relief to thousands of families in Nevada. Those families appreciate that very much. And we do know that Congress must take action to enact immigration reform that both secures our borders and provides a path to citizenship for TPS recipients, dreamers, and others. But as we work towards this goal, I do appreciate, and the families in Nevada appreciate your consideration. And so I'm going to turn now to the topic of the hearing, threats to the homeland. Difficult subject, again, like all things here, but rising anti-Semitism. Every day in every way, we see more and more attacks, outbreaks of anti-Semitism here in the United States. The recorded incidents nationwide, I believe they're at an all-time high. Not a day goes by without another report of an anti-Semitic hate crime or prominent individuals inciting anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. With Jewish communities around the world facing increasing discrimination as well as threats and acts of violence, a whole-of-government approach is needed to effectively address anti-Semitism. Because many individual agencies play a critical role in combating anti-Semitism, we need closer interagency coordination to share best practices, share that ever-important data that keeps us safer when we share it, that intelligence, the same thing, identify gaps in our efforts between agencies, and streamline overlapping activities and roles so that we can best combat anti-Semitism where we see it, and I believe execute a unified national strategy. So Secretary Mayorkas, how is DHS coordinating with other federal agencies in the fight against anti-Semitism? Would you support the development of a national strategy that uses a whole-of-government approach, cohesive, comprehensive approach to address this rising threat for all of us?
Senator Rosen, thank you. I think Director Wray spoke very powerfully, but a couple weeks ago, I believe it was in New York City, about the rise in anti-Semitism. And of course, where we become involved in the Department of Homeland Security is the connectivity between an ideology of hate, regardless of the ideology in particular, and violence. That is where we become involved. And we are working very, very closely with the FBI and our federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, campus law enforcement partners to address violence, an increasing level of violence born of ideologies of hate. And quite clearly, anti-Semitism is one of the rising ones, and it was at a high level to begin with. We are very grateful for your and this committee's support of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. We are seeking in the fiscal year 2023 budget an increase from $250 to $360 million. That assists religious institutions, faith-based institutions, and other nonprofit organizations to really raise their level of security in response to increasing violence born of hate. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have published an unprecedented number of alerts and bulletins to our local state law enforcement personnel about an increasing threat level born of ideologies of hate.
So you would support a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism?
I would.
Thank you. Director Wray, I want to move over to you because I know that the FBI, as you stated, found anti-Semitic hate crimes rose by 6% in 2020. It represents the highest total in 12 years. It constitutes 60% of all incidents based on religion. And in your estimation, your research and data, what it's telling you, what is driving this alarming trend? How is the FBI working with communities, state and local law enforcement, again, to be sure we're coordinating, and would you support a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism?
Well, taking the last part first, certainly I would support a national strategy. Second, the percentage is even worse than you summarized. I think it's 63% of all religiously motivated violent extremism incidents are motivated by anti-Semitism, and that's against a population that is only 2.4, I think, % of the American public. So it's pretty stark. And from our perspective, we see the Jewish community getting it from all sides, which may contribute to what's driving it, because not only have they long been a target of foreign terrorist organizations, and we've disrupted attacks by foreign terrorist organizations and foreign-inspired violent extremists against synagogues, for example. But then in addition to that, they're, of course, the target of domestic violent extremists. And as you may remember, we've disrupted an attempt to blow up a synagogue in the Las Vegas area just a couple of years ago, for example. So we're trying to tackle it both through the domestic terrorism lens, through our joint terrorism task forces, and through the hate crime lens through our civil rights program. And we created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell, which brings those two things together to ensure that we're pushing out information to our partners, whether it's at DHS or state local law enforcement or the community, and particularly the Jewish community, to be better able to anticipate what might be coming and prevent attacks.
Well, that's good. It really goes to my next question, because we do believe that hate crimes are vastly underreported because of fear sometimes, right? And since the enactment of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act last year, do you feel that there's been an improvement in local and state law enforcement reporting hate crimes to the FBI and just reporting in general? Or how are you, is that been helping us?
Well, two things. One, I think overall reporting of hate crimes has gone up, and frankly, the Jewish community has been ahead of other communities that are victims in reporting historically. So we have been trying to preach the importance of reporting, and we have seen reporting coming up. The only caveat I would put on that is that we are in the midst of a multi-year transition to a different crime statistics reporting mechanism that's been anticipated for about a decade, I think. And so this particular year, the number may be somewhat flawed in terms of, or underreported in terms of the record keeping, just because of the transition that some police departments are making over from the old system to the new system. But as I would expect, as we go forward next year and beyond, it'll get back to being more comprehensive, and I fully expect it to show exactly what you're saying, which is that the hate crimes are on the rise.
Well, the analyst in me hopes that everyone who's converting to this is all using the same algorithm, so we have good reports. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Sinema, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I want to express my sorrow with the news from Puerto Rico today. Air and Marine operations agents perform a very dangerous job with honor and integrity, and my thoughts are with our injured agents and their families, the family of the deceased agent, and all of Air and Marine operations. News like this today underscores why our work and our oversight is so important, and we owe it to our agents and our officers to do our part to secure the border and keep our communities safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Fiscal year 2022 saw a record number of encounters at our southwest border, over 2.3 million individuals. While just under half of these migrants were removed under Title 42 authorities, the current system had multiple points of failure throughout the summer. In Arizona, local governments were forced to step in to provide emergency support to avoid street releases, and have reassigned staff from other important roles to help manage the release of migrants from CBP custody. Border areas outside of Arizona have seen significant street releases, some coming in recent weeks. These releases directly onto city streets are inhumane and leave migrants vulnerable to the elements and bad actors intent on preying upon the most vulnerable. So the administration's continued failures on the border places Arizona communities and our nation's security at risk. The ongoing influx of migrants puts serious strain on our CBP resources, and it forces our Border Patrol agents out of the field and into processing and administrative roles. With the sudden announcement that Title 42 will be terminated in December, I'm extremely worried that DHS is not ready and that border communities and migrants will suffer the costs for this lack of preparation. It's obvious that the current strategy being implemented at our southwest border is not working and that change is necessary. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here today. These current levels of migration are unprecedented. Following the D.C. Circuit's recent ruling regarding Title 42, Arizonans are concerned that we'll soon see these numbers surge even higher. And we need to send a clear message to potential migrants that we will be fair and humane, but we will secure our border and enforce our laws. Given the recent developments regarding Title 42, do you have a plan to ensure that those who enter without inspection are facing swifter and more certain consequences?
We do, Senator, and at the outset, thank you very much for recognizing the tragedy that our air and marine operations personnel within CBP suffered off the coast of Puerto Rico, and we pray for the family of the officer who lost his life, and we pray for the swift recovery of those who have been injured. We do have a plan, and I think there are a number of examples. One is how we've approached the increased number of encounters of Venezuelan nationals by building a lawful pathway for them to arrive safely in an orderly way in the United States, should they qualify and should they pass through our screening and vetting, and to deliver a consequence regime should they not avail themselves of that lawful pathway. The asylum rule that we have promulgated is a way of taking a broken asylum system, and we're grateful for your bipartisan work with Senator Cornyn in your proposed bill as a starting point to fix a broken asylum system. But we promulgated a regulation in the absence of much needed legislation to fix the system, which takes a 6 to 8 year asylum period, which is just unmanageable, and reduces it potentially to under a year, which is going to change the migratory patterns of individuals seeking asylum in this country. Also, with respect to the fact that you mentioned that Border Patrol agents have not been out in the field, we've actually surged resources to the southern border, not only from different parts of our department, but contract personnel, an incredible number of contract personnel, so that we can get those agents out in the field doing what they swore to uphold, which is the detection and interdiction of individuals to enhance their swift removal should they not qualify for relief, and their ability to remain in the United States should the law so permit.
Thank you. Secretary, according to data from the Executive Office for Immigration Review, in fiscal year 2022, over 20% of initial cases were completed with an in absentia removal order. While that's a steep decline from the 50% mark that we reached in fiscal year 2020, that number is still far too high. So in order for our immigration system to function, we must ensure that individuals who refuse to comply with our immigration laws and are ordered removed from the United States actually experience that enhanced consequence regime. So how is DHS planning to ensure that people who willfully defy our immigration process are promptly removed from the country?
Senator, I would say two things. Number one, the data evidences quite powerfully that individuals who are represented by counsel have a much higher appearance rate in the immigration enforcement proceedings that we commence. The immigration system is extraordinarily complex, and we're dealing with vulnerable populations without counsel. Number one. Number two, we've expanded our alternatives to detention and technologized our ability to keep track of individuals, not just by the rather primitive ankle bracelets, but by a phone system that does not allow people to make calls. It's not a phone operable in that sense, but actually that enables us to keep track and make sure that they're checking in with us. So the expansion of the alternatives to detention is an effort that we have very well underway.
My Bipartisan Border Solutions Act, which you just referenced and of course highlighted in our budget hearing earlier this year, creates regional processing centers across the U.S. And these centers would co-locate offices and agencies that play a role in the asylum process, which would enhance the processing of migrants seeking asylum to the U.S. I believe that these centers are key to any reforms intended to limit the strain currently placed on DHS. As introduced, the text placed Border Patrol in charge of detention. But this year, as noted earlier, we've seen additional agents being pulled out of the field due to processing needs, which has limited some of the operational control. Which DHS component would be best suited to take over the responsibility of those processing centers?
Senator, your bipartisan bill with Senator Cornyn is a very important start to fix a broken asylum system. I'd want to study actually which personnel would be best suited. Our goal is to make sure that our Border Patrol agents are out in the field doing the work that they signed up to do, and that, frankly, they are funded to do. We have made tremendous strides in getting them out in the field. This is a problem that arose last year, given the increase in the number of encounters. We really have made tremendous strides, and I could provide specific data. But with respect to your detailed question, I'd want to study the profile of the individuals that should maintain the custody of migrants encountered and placed in those processing centers at the border.
Mr. Chairman, I know that my time's expired. May I ask one quick follow-up question?
We do have a second round, but it'll be real quick.
Thanks. I've heard concerns that some of the timelines in the bill that Cornyn and I introduced may be too restrictive. So now that you've had some time to implement the asylum processing rule, we'd like to get your feedback on what a more feasible timeline would be in which credible fear interviews could be performed.
We'd be pleased to provide that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. We have, for our witnesses to know, we have one, perhaps two senators to finish up the first round. Then we'll take a 5-minute break to allow you to stretch your legs a little bit, and then we'll be back for the second round. Senator Padilla, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. First question is going to be for Secretary Mayorkas. As you recall, Mr. Secretary, last year expressed significant concerns about the critical incident teams with Customs and Border Protection and their involvement with internal investigations of CBP agents. Now, these units, as we understand, have operated since 1987, but their investigations were never authorized because they're not legitimate federal criminal investigators, and their actions seem to shield CBP agents from liability. So I was pleased to hear that Commissioner Magnus issued a directive to end the use of critical incident teams by the end of the fiscal year prior to his resignation. However, the existence of such an entity for over 3 decades is disturbing and undermines the transparency needed with the nation's largest law enforcement agency. So I hope you share my concerns regarding the need to protect the integrity of DHS and all its components. Do you agree that there's no place for shadow police units within Customs and Border Patrol? And can you speak to any of the efforts that the department has taken to ensure that entities similar to the critical incident teams are not reestablished?
Senator, there's no place for a shadow investigative authority in any part of the department or any part of the government. And what we have done is actually commenced a wholesale review department-wide of our investigative discipline and accountability processes.
So, and how's the status of the termination or phase out as the commissioner?
I will check and get back to you with respect to the status of their termination.
Please do, please do. Next question is both for you and Director Wray. Earlier this year, the department released a report that detailed the need for improvements to information sharing as a means to addressing violent extremist activity. Mr. Secretary, I was pleased to see that your agency planned to develop a central case management system and information sharing mechanism for investigating allegations. Can you provide an update on where DHS is with these developments and whether there's been any significant roadblocks?
Senator, I'm not aware of any significant roadblocks, and in partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, we have promulgated more products, more information sharing products than I can remember for the Department of Homeland Security in the many years that I've been there. The NTAS bulletin, other more or less formal bulletins and alerts to our state and local tribal territorial campus partners. We have really built a very cohesive operation in disseminating threat information throughout the country to really ensure that our local communities are aware of the threat information and law enforcement is able to prevent it to the best of its capabilities.
Okay. Director Wray, the Department of Justice similarly responded to President Biden's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism by highlighting the changes it would make to improve information sharing with state, local, tribal, and territorial partners as well. What specific changes have been made at the FBI to eliminate any gaps in information sharing?
So I think we engage in information sharing on this with state and local partners in two principal ways. The biggest one being through our joint terrorism task forces, where we have lots of state and local law enforcement agencies as task force officers on those task forces. One of the things that we've done over the last little while now is improve the amount of training that we provide to participants on those task forces and to state and local agencies more broadly about indicators of violence, indicators of mobilization to violence, symbology, iconography, things like that, to put them in a better position to be the eyes and ears that we need them to be, and then have information flow kind of in a virtuous cycle back with us. So that would be one of the things that I mentioned. Obviously, the bulletins that Secretary Mayorkas referenced is as a product of great work between the FBI and Department of Homeland Security to share information, and including with the fusion centers, which is a very important piece of the information sharing infrastructure, if you will, that exists in this country.
Yeah. And just in that spirit, I mean, the couple of the most critical areas in which to apply improved information sharing is when it comes to combating gun violence and domestic terrorism. According to a joint report issued in May of last year, the FBI and DHS determined that the greatest domestic terrorism threat is posed by lone offenders who are radicalized online and who look to attack soft targets with easily accessible weapons. Sadly, we've seen too many instances even since then. Highland Park, Uvalde, Buffalo, and even in my home state of California at the Geneva Presbyterian Church. The common thread here in each case was the ease with which the perpetrator acquired a weapon. Can you detail what steps are being taken by the Bureau to ensure that threats to our schools and places of worship and other important places are identified and neutralized?
So I guess there are a number of things that we do on that front. When it comes to schools specifically, we've been engaged in a very proactive outreach campaign to schools, done active shooter training, for example, at schools. Lots of our field offices meet with school officials in their areas of responsibility to help them identify better what to be on the lookout for. Because one of the things that we've learned in studying this issue over time when it comes to school shootings, for example, is that there's almost always somebody, a classmate, a teacher, a family member, someone who saw the transformation in the person, and that if they had known to speak up, known to report, it might have been preventable. And in those instances where we have successfully prevented a school shooting, for example, and those often don't get reported, but there are any number in which we have successfully prevented have almost always been because somebody in that situation did report. So we're trying to get the word out that way. Obviously, our NICS system, which does the background checks to ensure that people who are legally prohibited from having firearms don't get them, is very active, processing background checks. And of course, with the recently passed legislation, there will be additional steps that we're taking to implement that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff, you're recognized for your questions. And after this question, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for your service to the country and in national defense of public safety. Director Wray, always a pleasure to see a fellow Georgian, and thank you for your continued service as well. Each time we've engaged in a setting like this one, I've asked you to assess the drivers of elevated levels of violent crime in Georgia and nationwide. According to FBI data, violent crime did increase from 2020 to 2021. Could you please provide the committee with an updated assessment of what is driving this dynamic?
So there are a lot of things driving the violent crime crisis that is occurring in this country, in Georgia and elsewhere. There are a few things. First, I would say The traditional drivers are all there, drugs.
To the witnesses for being here.
Illegal gun trafficking, gangs, socioeconomic factors. So those are all still present. But in addition to that, we are seeing, and I hear this from chiefs and sheriffs all the time, as well as from our own agents, an alarming uptick in the incidence of juveniles engaging in violence, often graduating from carjackings to even worse violence. And that is a real challenge for the legal system because we're not set up to very effectively deal with crimes committed by minors. We are also seeing, not everywhere, but an awful lot of places.
Director Wray, let me start with you.
Too many dangerous offenders getting back out on the streets. And the only thing more frustrating to the hardworking men of law enforcement than having to arrest somebody who should have been behind bars is having to arrest the same person over and over again. And that's a product of any number of things. It could be backlogs, it could be certain prosecution practices, certain kind of bail practices, and of course the juvenile issue that I mentioned. So those are some of the things that are driving it. In Georgia in particular, pretty much every week I feel like our Atlanta field office is engaging in some kind of operation where they're seizing drugs, guns, cash, whether it's meth, whether it's fentanyl. And so they're experiencing a lot of the same things that we're seeing nationally. Certainly neighborhood gangs are a big phenomenon in our home state. We are also seeing, I would add two other things that have a little bit of a Georgia wrinkle to it. One is juveniles who post-COVID have not returned to school. And so that may contribute to the juvenile effect. And we're seeing, violent criminals who are either detained or imprisoned because they're serving a sentence who still have access to their cellular phones and are able to continue to participate in the activity despite best efforts by the corrections officials to continue to participate in the violent activity. So there's some of the things. And I guess one last one, an alarming phenomenon of switches which convert otherwise lawful weapons into fully automatic, and that, of course, increases the violent potential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Director Wray. You have a new SAC in that Atlanta office, and welcomed her upon her arrival. Wish her and her team the best. What can the FBI continue to do, and what more can you do to help protect communities in Georgia who are fearful that they may face carjacking or mugging or aggravated assault out on the sidewalk or at a shopping mall? What are you doing and what more can you do? And will you continue to work with local law enforcement in Georgia to crack down on the violent crime that's preying on innocent citizens?
Violent crime is a major, major priority for the FBI. As I think I said in response to an earlier question, I still think it continues to be the place where we have the most single allocation of resources in terms of personnel. We have Safe Streets task forces that focus on sort of the gang violence. We have other kinds of violent crime task forces, all of which allow us to bring together what the FBI has to bear with state and local partners who participate on those task forces. We do active shooter training and things like that to help the community better protect itself. Our lab, close to half of the work that they do from a forensic side is in support of violent crime cases, often for our state and local partners. Senator Scott and I had a conversation about the tip line that we have out in West Virginia, where we prioritize getting threats to life out to state and local partners on the violent crime side. So there's a whole host of things that we're doing, but this remains top of mind for me and for my team. And when I am talking to chiefs and sheriffs, this is always the first topic we talk about and the last topic we talk about because it's so much on everyone's mind.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Could you please assess the most significant threats to port infrastructure in the United States? Of course, we have in Georgia, the Port of Savannah. It's the fourth busiest deep water port in the country.
With respect to the infrastructure itself?
Two ports.
Two ports. One of the concerns that we have is, of course, the cybersecurity threat to ports. We are increasing the level of technology by which our ports operate, and that is why not only does Customs and Border Protection have a focus on cybersecurity, but so does the United States Coast Guard. So I would identify, with respect to our ports, cybersecurity as a significant threat stream, and we're of course very focused on defending against it and strengthening our cybersecurity.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And will you and your staff continue to work with the Georgia Ports Authority, state and local law enforcement in Georgia to help harden the Port of Savannah and other critical port infrastructure in Georgia against that threat and other threats?
We absolutely will. And, through the infrastructure bill that has been passed, fortunately, we have tremendous funding to dedicate to not only the improvement of the infrastructure itself, but also its hardening.
I want to close very briefly, Secretary Mayorkas. I thank you for your cooperation in providing to the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations the documents and records that allowed us to conduct an 18-month investigation of medical mistreatment of women in detention. We held that hearing, as you likely know, earlier this week. The bipartisan findings that Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and I have presented are deeply disturbing and suggest there are major gaps in the vetting and oversight of DHS contracted physicians who treat the detainee population. I ask that you review those findings in detail and that we will have a follow-up engagement to discuss the steps that DHS is taking and needs to take to ensure that the dignity and human rights and constitutional rights of all detainees are upheld.
I look forward to doing so, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. To our witnesses, we've had you there for quite some time, so we're going to take a brief break. We'll come back for a second round for those senators who want a second round, but the time will be just 5 minutes in the second round. But let's take a recess for 5 minutes and we'll reconvene.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I turned on my mic this time. This hearing has been nothing more than a joke. There's been a couple of moments. Josh Hawley, kind of went on about how Christopher Wray, the FBI director, probably lied under oath when he said that he had to leave the last one for a business meeting. Turns out he wasn't on a business meeting. He was going on a vacation to the Ozarks or something. I don't know. He's going somewhere stupid. And everyone's like freaking out. They're all like, oh, Nancy Pelosi stepping down from Democrat leadership. Who cares? I don't care. She's an idiot. I don't really care about any of this stuff. Anything that's happening. I got my mustache is long and I got one hair that I keep seeing when I look down. It's freaking annoying me, bro. Look at that, man. My eyebrow long. So I got to trim everything. But it's crazy. If I go on Twitter right now, it's all clips of Nancy Pelosi. Who gives a shit? She's horrible for this country, and I'm glad she's stepping down. I wish she would just go away. Speaking of Nancy Pelosi, did you know that the San Francisco Police Department is currently blocking ICE agents from interviewing Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi's attacker? Yes, ICE agents are attempting to speak to the Canadian illegal immigrant that, has been illegally here in the United States. And the city of San Francisco, the Dem-controlled city of San Francisco, is not allowing federal ICE agents to speak to Paul Pelosi or Paul Pelosi's assailant. Isn't that weird? That's a weird news. That's coming from someone that says, unconfirmed source, but who cares? Also, just a little update on Oreo Express. Many of you guys saw he made a video yesterday where he said that the reason he got arrested for gun charges or a felon in possession of firearms was because of the Department of Justice and because he was stopping kids from having trans surgery or some shit like that. He just made some weird excuse and said it's politically motivated and that it's all going to get taken care of by the court. It's not going to. I mean, when I look up the laws, it's very clear. It's very clear. When you and yes, I do. I mean, I never knew he was charged with domestic abuse. He didn't. Granted, he didn't plead guilty to domestic abuse. He only pled guilty to battering his spouse, but not domestic abuse. But however, California law says, guess what? If you're convicted of a misdemeanor battery, you are barred from owning a firearm in California for 10 years, which is why he's not charged federally. Which is weird because it says the Department of Justice was the one that arrested him, but he's charged with state violations. He's charged with possessing a gun on the state level. You know what I mean? on the state level. So he's charged with 2 violations, and I had him up right now. And I looked them all up. It's very simple. Like, would he be able to own a gun later? In terms of whether he can own a gun on the federal level, I don't know, because he didn't plead guilty to beating his wife. He pled guilty to battering his wife. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure there's some wide story. I'm sure he's going to be like, he doesn't know the story. He shouldn't be talking about this. Blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't know the story. You know, he probably just like was restraining her while she was hitting him. You know, the same thing that most men make excuses when they beat women. I can say with 100% certainty in my life, there's never been a time that I've raised my hand to a woman. Why? And you women ready to get pissed off? Because you're not equal to me. When we go to fight, you're not equal. I'm a power lifter. I could pick up a fucking car. You're not. If I punch someone with full force, guy or gal, they're going to get effed up. Certainly not going to do that to a lady. Plus, I mean, it would be an unfair fight. Plus, I've been fighting for years. You know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. And it's a wonder that so many people still watch him, knowing that he was charged with domestic assault and pled guilty to battery with a 3-year probation term, which is crazy. It's just crazy. But based on California law, which is, what is it, 242 PC, that's what he was charged with. California Penal Code 242 PC. California law defines the crime of battery as any willful and unlawful use of force or violence upon the person of another. So it's kind of interesting. But I know, because a lot of people keep asking me about it and sending me messages, and I don't really want to get too much. You know, that's why, like, with him, I know he had a criminal record. I don't care about it. You know what I mean? People change. People have criminal records that we all know, and I don't care. It doesn't affect me. But, however, women beaters, pedophiles, stuff like that, no, they're less than human, in my opinion. Do you know what I mean? They're less than human. Because it doesn't take much to hit a woman or assault someone that's in a wheelchair too. That doesn't take a lot of much, and Oreo Express did that as well. And he did that on camera. But it is what it is. Who knows? Hopefully, he's got kids, so I don't want any ill will. I hope he never even spends a day in jail. You know, I hope he takes a plea bargain, rats somebody out, or whatever he's going to do, so he doesn't do any jail time. And I sincerely hope that. Because he's got a young child, he's got a wife, and I don't think that they would fare well with him in jail. You know, he is the provider of the house, from what I understand, although, I don't know. Yeah, whatever. But what else? Some men are smaller than women, and the horse facility, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to read your comment. Yeah, some women are strong. And you know what? Could I get my ass beat by a woman? Probably. You know why? Because I'm not going to fucking hit her back. You know what I mean? But here's the thing. If a woman identifies as a man, fair game, right? Right? Isn't that the determining factor right there? If a woman identifies as a man, uses he, him pronouns. Oh, what do you do about pronouns? What about they, thems? Are they considered this? These are real conversations we have to have as Americans. What if you get in a fight with a they, them? Are you still considered equal? Are you still not allowed to hit him? I don't know. I think you should be able to. You should identify as fist and fist number 2. You know what I mean? They, them. Oh, what's your pronouns? They, them. Oh, what's yours? Fist and kick your ass. You know what I mean? Actually, fist and ass probably should go in the same phrase, even if there's a different context. It shouldn't go together. No. Let's take that back. Someone said, don't try to fight they, them. You're clearly outnumbered. Yeah, there was a puff piece that was done by the media the other day that said, in the past year, 2021, 35 trans people were murdered in the United States. And I'm like, no shit. Really? 35 trans people were killed in the United States? Not as they weren't targeted because they were trans. No, 35 trans people in total were killed in homicides. Not because they were trans. Again, like this could have been a robbery. Someone's like, hey, dude. And he's like, well, who are you calling dude? It could have been like that. I don't know. But it's any murder. And they wrote a huge article and said, like, trans people are coming under attack and the recent rhetoric and blah, blah, blah. And last year, highest number ever, 36 people died. And I'm like, bro, that's like a basic weekend in Philadelphia. like shit, 35 trans
Committee
people
will
died
come
in a
back
year.
into
Imagine
order.
what happens
Senator
in
Ossoff,
Philly
you're
every weekend,
recognized
or
for,
Chicago, or New
second
York.
round.
Thank you
You
for the
can't talk about
extraordinary
that anymore
courtesy,
because black
Mr.
lives
Chairman.
don't matter anymore.
And
It's trans lives,
welcome
trans
back
black
to our
lives,
panel.
trans
I'd
black
like to
lives, they, them. All right?
begin,
You
Director
guys ready
Wray,
to go back to this hearing?
by requesting an update to the extent you're able to provide details
he
to be
going
appreciated on your efforts to defend historically black colleges and universities in Georgia and across the country from threats. Of course, threats have targeted Spelman College, other HBCUs in the state of Georgia. This is of deep concern to me and the whole community. Please provide the committee with an update on your efforts.
Well, Senator, certainly we share your concern. The fear and disruption that those threats have caused is utterly unconscionable. And this investigation, really I should say these investigations, plural, have been a priority for the FBI, including multiple field offices, joint terrorism task forces, et cetera. The update that I can give is that for the first tranche of the threats nationwide, the ones that generated probably the most initial media attention, if you will. There has been a recent development. An individual who's a juvenile, a little bit like the exchange that we had right before the break, has been identified. And because of the federal limitations on federal charging of juveniles for most relevant offenses, we've worked with state prosecutors on an unrelated state charge, which ensures restrictions and monitoring of the individual and disruption of his behavior. Now, that still leaves two other subsequent tranches of threats against historically black colleges and universities and other historically black religious institutions, for example, that we are still very much actively investigating. And because of that, there's not much I can share on those. But suffice to say, we got a lot of people working on this, and we're determined to see it through.
Thank you, Director Wray. Director
Wait. I have to interrupt this. An important message. Look at this shit. What the fuck is going on in D.C.? Look, virtual mental health roundtable featuring the cast of The West Wing. Are you fucking shitting me? This is real. This is right now. The White House is holding a mental health roundtable with the cast of The West Wing. What the fuck?
Transitioning their way of attacking to lone actor type threats inspired violence here in the United States homeland. And we see very similar trends in the racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists bucket of ideologically motivated threats as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. The authorization from the Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction is set to expire next year. In preparation, Senator Portman and I introduced a bill that reauthorizes CWMD office and empowers the newly created Office of Health Security at DHS. The bill clarifies roles and responsibilities for both offices and adds important accountability and oversight measures. Secretary Mayorkas, could you explain to this committee how the expiration of the authorization for CWMD would impact it if it expires, and particularly how important the legislation is to deal with local, tribal, and territorial partners on this critical issue?
Mr. Chairman, the Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction is of vital importance to the Department of Homeland Security. I think if we look back in time and we see the use of chemical weapons in Syria and the tragedies that inflicted on the people there, that's one powerful example, and we don't have to look that far back in history to understand the importance of the office. Just the fact that the potential, the specter of the use of nuclear weapons was discussed in public fora in light of Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine speaks of the criticality of this office, and we do hope that the bipartisan bill that you have presented is passed. We need this office reauthorized.
Thank you, Secretary. Director Abizad, how has the threat from weapons of mass destruction increased or decreased over the last 5 years?
The threat that terrorists would use WMD and particularly CBRN capabilities, I think, has been sustained over that 5-year time period, certainly.
Very good. Secretary Mayorkas, you ordered an internal review of at DHS after the tragic shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde to assess whether the department was effectively using its resources to address domestic terrorism and targeted violence. As a result of that review that you did, you announced the appointment of Nick Rasmussen as the full-time counterterrorism coordinator. What goals have you asked him to accomplish, and what's the time frame for him to achieve those goals?
Mr. Chairman, Nick Rasmussen comes with impeccable credentials to be this counterterrorism coordinator for the Department of Homeland Security. He used to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and just a distinguished career. What I've asked him to do in the first instance is really take a look at our counterterrorism efforts across the department and make sure that we are being as impactful and effective as possible. One of the efforts that I have across the department in every mission set is to drive greater cohesion so that our impact is maximized. That is the first thing that I have asked him to take a look at, and I'm actually meeting with him in a few days to discuss the setting of a timeline and incremental goals along the way. And I look forward to discussing that with you.
Right, we'll look forward to that. Certainly, we do have to have a coordinator overseeing all this, so I appreciate the efforts that you're making in that area. The administration just released an updated strategy and implementation plan on countering biological threats. This new strategy implements recommendations learned from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the monkeypox public health emergency. Certainly, global shortcomings in preparedness for the pandemic and biosecurity may inspire adversaries to develop and use biological weapons in the future. Certainly a major concern for all of us. Secretary Mayorkas, could you discuss how DHS is working to implement the National Biodefense Strategy, and how has the creation of the Office of Health Security better aligned DHS efforts in this space?
Mr. Chairman, that strategy really speaks of a whole of society approach. It's not something that the federal government can do alone, but we need state and local partners and private citizens, nonprofit organizations, academia. So it's a very holistic, inclusive approach to the problem, and that is the approach that we are taking in the department through a CWMD, the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office, the Office of Health Affairs, and importantly, our Office of Science and Technology with the research and development that it spearheads. And I'm grateful to this committee for really moving forward with the confirmation of Dmitry Kutsinov as our new Undersecretary for the Office of Science and Technology. So it's really a very all-of-society approach, and our leader of the Office of Health Affairs, our Chief Medical Officer, is a tremendous leader in identifying what are the greatest threats that are imminent or upon us and developing a strategy to address it. He was instrumental in our protocols to address COVID-19 in immigration detention centers along the southwest border, working with border communities to develop a real infrastructure to address that. And so we're taking a all-of-department approach in the context of an all-of-society approach that the strategy calls for.
Well, that's good. This committee will deal with this issue extensively over the next couple of years, so look forward to working closely with your team to address the challenge and the threat. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Secretary, nice to see you. I didn't get to visit with you last time, so let's start with you. I think my colleagues have established, given what we're seeing on the southern border, the massive increase in illegality there, that's clearly not a priority for your agency. So let's talk about what appears to be, and that is spying on Americans and censoring their speech. You have turned your agency into a censorship machine. Now, you said earlier this year that you disbanded the Disinformation Governance Board, which I thought was totally unconstitutional, but that turns out to be, at best, misleading. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you're doing. Your own quadrennial review, which was just reported in the press, says that disinformation is going to be the new focus at DHS. The Quad Review says that DHS plans to target, I'm quoting now, inaccurate information domestically on a wide array of subjects, including, quoting, the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support for Ukraine. This is what you're devoting your agency's resources to. So I guess my first question is an American citizen who criticizes COVID mandates now to be treated as a domestic terrorist?
Of course not, and I'd like to say three things since you have three inaccuracies in the question you posed to me. Number one, border security is a priority of ours. Number two, the department does not censor speech. And number three, we did not publish a quadrennial review.
Does it exist, the quadrennial review?
I believe it is being worked on.
Well, it's been published in the media. Will you make it public?
When it is final, it will be public.
Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter this article called "The Truth Cops," published in The Intercept. Here's my question then. If you're not censoring speech and if you're not treating Americans as domestic terrorists, then why is it that you're pressuring big tech to treat American citizens as if they're threats to the homeland? Why are you pressuring them to censor speech? Let's take a look at some new documents that have come to light that show what your administration is doing, this administration is doing to censor speech. Let's take a look at this email from July 16th, 2021. It's over my shoulder here. Facebook emailing HHS saying, I know our teams met today to better understand the scope of what the White House expects from us on misinformation going forward. Are you familiar with that email?
No.
Let's try another one.
And if I should...
How about, hold on. We'll get to that. But you're not familiar with this. All right. Let's try a different one. Here's one from July 20th, 2021. The White House emails Facebook saying, any way we can get this pulled down. 46 seconds later, Facebook responds, yep, we're on it. Are you familiar with that email?
No.
Okay, how about this one? On July 23rd, 2021, Facebook employee writes to HHS, says, thank you for taking the time to meet today. Wanted to make sure you saw the steps we took just this past week to adjust policies and what we are removing with respect to misinformation. Are you familiar with that one?
Senator, we do not instruct.
Just yes or no.
No, because I'm the secretary of DHS.
Well, I'm asking you that because it's funny you say that. A federal judge has just found as a finding of fact, Mr. Secretary, that your office, and I'm going to quote now, is supervising the nerve center of federally directed censorship. It's a federal judge and a federal lawsuit. You are supervising the nerve center of federally directed censorship. Here's another email, August 20th, 2021. Facebook writes again to HHS and highlights that Facebook is increasing the strength of our demotions for COVID and vaccine-related content. April 16th, 2021, Rob Flaherty at the White House circulates a Zoom meeting invitation to Twitter employees stating White House staff will be briefed by Twitter on vaccine misinformation. We have example after example of this administration coordinated, apparently, according to a federal court, by your agency, pressuring, coercing social media companies to engage in censorship. Is that constitutional?
That is unequivocally false.
Is what the emails show.
It is unequivocally false, Senator.
You are not pressuring the big tech companies to take down accounts. You are not meeting with them to ask them to censor on your behalf.
That is correct. We are not.
You're not having any meetings with them whatsoever.
We meet with the tech companies.
How often?
To address the Homeland Security mission.
How often do you meet with them?
For example, online child sexual exploitation is a scourge in this country, and we have an obligation to address it.
You're saying that no one in your office has ever met with, coordinated, or otherwise engaged in any contact with a social media company in which you spoke to them about vaccine mandates, about COVID mask mandates, about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, about the current U.S. involvement in Ukraine. None of that has ever happened.
I don't know what you're referring to, Senator, and I can
read the emails.
And I can tell you this. Well, you've actually cited emails outside of our department. But if
I've cited a federal judge who says your department is engaged in supervising the nerve center of federally directed censorship. Here's my point, Mr. Secretary. It has been established for years in this country, as you very well know because you're a lawyer, that the federal government may not use private third parties to engage in activities that are unconstitutional. That's exactly what you and this administration are doing. You are leveraging private companies to carry out censorship on your behalf. It's dystopian, but worse than that, it's unconstitutional.
It's also false.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Seeing no other senator here, I want to thank our witnesses once again for joining us today. We recognize that you all have very busy schedules, and we appreciate you joining us to help the committee better understand some of the most pressing security issues that our nation is facing. This committee will continue to work to address many of the issues that we discussed today. For example, as we heard today, the threat posed by drones is extremely serious, and we cannot let legislation that protects Americans from unmanned aircraft systems expire in December. I look forward to working with my colleagues here in the Senate and in the House to ensure that the federal government is effectively managing this threat. I will also continue to work with the department and the FBI on improving the government's response to the threat posed by domestic violent extremism. I appreciate the administration's efforts to tackle this issue, but more can and must be done. Without a more data-driven approach to understand the threat, the government will continue to face challenges addressing this issue. I will also continue to press the administration on meeting mandatory congressional reporting requirements so that we can ensure the federal government has the authorities and the resources needed to help prevent deadly incidents like the tragic shooting in Buffalo from occurring again. And finally, as several members have done on behalf of everyone on this committee, I would like to express our sincere condolences on the absolutely tragic news of loss and injury to CBP Air and Marine Operations agents. Each and every day throughout the pandemic, the frontline personnel of DHS have put their lives on the line to protect Americans from serious threats that we have discussed today, and we all thank them for their commitment. While we have spent several productive hours this morning examining our nation's greatest security threats, there's more work to do for our committee to continue conducting oversight and ensuring national security agencies are effectively focused on their critical mission. For the record, this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on December 2nd, 2022 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.
Lame. So, yeah, we just didn't learn nothing. Nothing for days. I think what I'm going to do, however, is I'm not going to end this because that would be rude of me. No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kick over to live coverage of whatever the fuck is going on the House floor. Or I'm sorry, the Senate floor. Because apparently they've called, they're doing a quorum call for the motion to proceed the consideration of H.R. 8404, which is the Respect for Marriage Act. That is the pending question. So I don't know if this is where they're going to go into debate for it or whatever. I have no idea. But I figured, what the fuck? I'll just stay live. I actually am not going to be paying attention. I'll be listening, but not paying attention because I'm going to go pack some coffee. I didn't think I was like, I got all set to do it today. And then I was like, I forgot my razor blade at my house. But nope, it's here. So I'm going to do that. And then I may even do a little chest workout on the new gym equipment back there once I finally get everything all situated. And yeah, you know. So let's watch the House floor. Again, they're on a quorum call, so we'll have to wait and see how long that's going to be. In terms of doing a show tonight, I'm not quite sure if I'm even going to do one right now. Kind of feeling a little blase blah. You know what I'm saying? But yeah. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so here's the House floor. And the sound is on, so as soon as they kick it on, you'll be able to hear it. But they're doing a quorum call, which is where they all sit around. And just remember, the majority of these people that you'll see on there, all the senators, make $172,000 a year to do exactly what you're seeing on television, which is nothing. It's very sad. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? What else is going on? Still no update. They haven't provided any update on who the guy that was driving that vehicle that ran over all those sheriff cadets yesterday. They still have yet to provide it. The AP just put out a long article where Sheriff Villanova said it looks to be like a tragic accident. They haven't released any information about the suspect, which I think is incredibly wrong. You know, what they're doing is it's seeming okay. Let's rant a little bit. It seems that they are doing something stupid. Yeah, I don't care about Darrell Brooks anymore. He's not even going to appear. This is just a status conference for whatever charges they're there. Like, here's what should happen in Milwaukee. Because he's got charges in Milwaukee, I think, for running over his girl, or that same girl that he was going to beat up before he ran over all those people. The Milwaukee prosecutor should save the taxpayers the money. The guy's been sentenced to like 800 fucking years behind prison for life, lifetime, 6 consecutive life sentences plus 800 years. They shouldn't even waste any time. They should drop the charges. Maybe that's what they'll do today. Who knows? Because they actually have to have a hearing for it. But they should drop the charges on him and allow him to be sent up to state prison where it's not wasting any more taxpayer dollars. That's my humble opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if they even tried to do that he would try to fight it. Be like, you can't drop the charges. I'm not permitting that. What is this? April just sent me. I don't have Slack open. Let me open it. Oh, they did. Oh, so look at this. This was just a few minutes ago. What was it? 1 minute ago? They just updated. Authorities have confirmed Thursday that the 22-year-old driver who's accused of plowing into 25 law enforcement recruits for various agencies across LA with a Honda CRV was driving the wrong way in Whittier was arrested. The suspect has been identified as Nicholas Joseph Guerreras of Diamond Bar, and his bail is set at $2 million. He's due in court on Friday. According to investigators, he was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and may have been under the influence of a recreational drug during the crash. The California Highway Patrol said the collision was reported at 6:25 a.m. Wednesday near the intersection of Mills Avenue and Telegraph Road. CHP Captain Charlie Simpson said the driver was going southbound on Mills Avenue when he veered into the opposing lanes and struck the victims. Gutierrez underwent a sobriety test at the scene, and LA County Sheriff Alex Villanova later confirmed the driver passed the breathalyzer test. He suffered minor injuries from the horrific collision and was hospitalized. Gutierrez's family told Fox 11 that he is a good kid who respects law enforcement community because he comes from a law enforcement background. A video taken from the scene, I shared on my Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Names of the victims have not been released. Nicholas Joseph Gutierrez. Let's see. I bet it's already been scrubbed. That's probably what happened. I bet we were already scrubbing it from social media. I bet that's a common name too in Los Angeles. Yeah, there's so many, 215. Where did it say he was from in that article? Diamond Bar. Let me look that up. Gonna try to see. Yeah, it's probably not gonna show anything. And I'm sure Facebook has already scrubbed it. I'm sure his Twitter's been scrubbed. I bet everything's been scrubbed, to be completely honest. That's usually how they do it. That could be the reason why they waited so long to do it. I'm sure April is frantically going through social media trying to figure it out because maybe they didn't catch something. But he's been charged for being under the he was on recreational drugs, apparently. So that he must have had a blood test, and they determined it. Dun, 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 dun. That's not him. That's an older fella. It's not going to show anything. People. What did it say? Diamond Bar. Diamond Bar, California. Nope, nothing there. Fucking A. This is bullshit. Why'd they identify him today? You know? Why didn't they identify him yesterday? If this dude was, it fucking pisses me off, bro. Just pisses me off. Because you know damn well, any other scenario, this dude would have been, he would have been identified yesterday. Pisses me off. I'm trying to see. Whatever. I'm not going to be able to find it. Pisses me off. They showed him on FN. What? There's got to be a reason. What do you think the reason is that they withheld his identity? I don't know. It's just, it pisses me off. Pisses me off, bro. Let me see. Hold on. Has been charged with running over the police cadets yesterday morning. Police say he was under the influence of recreational drugs. You like my song? When he veered into the cadets, striking 25 of them. Bam. Ah. View. Undo. Oh, yeah. You guys have no idea. Because there was a spelling error and I didn't see it till after I sent it. No, I didn't again. Ugh. Tweet. View. Send now. There we go. Fixed. Gangsta. I don't even know if I'm going to keep this live, guys. I may just end it. I don't know if I'm going to do a show. If there's something else that happens, maybe I'll come up, but I don't think there's any reason, because if the retention numbers go down, then YouTube doesn't recommend it. So I'd rather keep it while there's a lot of people watching. These congressional hearings don't get a lot of airtime. People don't really care, which is crazy because they all should. Every single person. Like, if we could have 1,000 people watching because of Darrell Brooks' trial, we should have 2,000 watching what happens in Senate every single day. This is literally, these are the people that are fucking up your lives. Like, everybody should be watching it. But I don't want to screw up my YouTube retention levels by having everyone drop off, so there's no point in just live streaming it. I was like, if it would be nice, like, per se, if there was a website that just listed all of the committee meetings, like, live right there, all of the White House press conferences, like, just day, you know what I mean? Day. But yeah, I think I'm going to package some coffee, get all that stuff done, hit some chest workout, and go from there. And if anything does happen, I'll come back live. Not quite sure if I'm going to do a live show tonight, but yeah, you know what I mean? All right. Anywho.